My mom ordered me out of my own house with my newborn. Make room for your brother's family, they matter more. But it was my name on the deed. So that night I protected my baby and claimed everything. I answered through the intercom. Said 4 words. My mom's phone hit the ground. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Rachel and I am 33 years old. I was standing in the middle of my living room rocking my 3-week-old son Leo to sleep when the front door of my house suddenly swung open. The heavy oak door hit the wall with a loud thud that echoed through the entire first floor. I jumped instinctively, pulling Leo closer to my chest as his tiny eyes fluttered open and his face crumpled into a frightened cry. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was running on perhaps 2 hours of fractured sleep. The physical exhaustion of being 3 weeks postpartum was a heavy, suffocating weight that settled deep into my bones. Every muscle in my body ached, and my mind was clouded with that thick, disorienting fog that only new mothers truly understand. But the physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the emotional crater left behind by the sudden passing of my partner David, just 4 months into my pregnancy. I had navigated the hardest months of my life entirely alone, buying this beautiful historic colonial house in the suburbs and preparing the nursery with my own 2 hands. This 4-bedroom house with its original hardwood floors, large wrap-around porch and sprawling backyard was supposed to be our sanctuary. It was the only place I felt safe. That safety was shattered the moment my mother Barbara marched into my foyer. She was 62 years old, but carried herself with the arrogant energy of a woman who believed the world existed solely to serve her. She did not knock. She had used the emergency spare key I had foolishly given her months ago when I was pregnant and terrified of going into early labor alone. Right behind her was Vanessa, my brother Brandon's wife. Vanessa stepped over my threshold wearing her signature smirk, her designer handbag slung over her arm, completely ignoring the fact that she was tracking muddy footprints across my clean rug. Neither of them looked at me with an ounce of concern. Neither of them asked how I was recovering from childbirth. Neither of them even glanced at their newborn grandson and nephew who was now wailing in my arms. Instead, my mother dropped a massive stack of flattened cardboard moving boxes onto the floor. The sharp, abrasive sound of the cardboard slapping against the wood made Leo scream louder. I bounced him gently, trying to soothe him, while staring at the 2 women invading my home. "Mom, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice raspy from lack of sleep. "Why did you not call first?" My mother brushed past me, her eyes scanning the living room as if she were a real estate agent assessing a property for sale. "We do not have time for pleasantries, Rachel," she said briskly, waving her hand in the air. "You need to start packing up the nursery immediately. In fact, you need to start packing up the kitchen and the guest rooms too. The movers are going to be expensive, so the more you box up yourself, the better." I stopped rocking Leo for a second, my sleep-deprived brain struggling to process her words. "Packing," I repeated, staring at the empty boxes scattered across my foyer. "What are you talking about? Who is moving?" "You are obviously," my mother said, turning to look at me as if I were incredibly stupid. "Brandon's tech startup has undergone a temporary restructuring." A temporary restructuring. That was my mother's elegant, delusional way of saying that my 36-year-old brother, the undisputed golden child of our family, had failed once again. Brandon had spent his entire adult life launching one disastrous business venture after another, and my mother had spent her entire adult life bailing him out, making excuses for his incompetence, and forcing everyone else to cater to his whims. Vanessa sighed dramatically, wandering into my kitchen and running her hand along my granite countertops. "It has been a very stressful week for us, Rachel," she said, not sounding stressed at all. "Brandon has been working so hard, but the market is just so unpredictable right now. We need a stable place to land while he plans his next big move. The condo is just not going to work for us anymore." I tightened my grip on Leo, feeling a cold knot of dread form in my stomach. "Okay," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice calm so I would not upset the baby further. "I am sorry to hear Brandon's business is struggling, But what does that have to do with me packing up my house? My mother let out a sharp, condescending laugh. It has everything to do with you, Rachel. Brandon and Vanessa need this house. They have a real family. They have 2 growing children who need space to run around. They need the 4 bedrooms. They need the large backyard. It makes absolutely no sense for them to be cramped in a small space while you are sitting here hoarding all this square footage for yourself. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the moment where she would smile and tell me this was some bizarre, tasteless joke. But her expression was completely serious. Her eyes were hard and unyielding. "You want me to give my house to Brandon?" I asked, my voice dropping to an incredulous whisper. "I am not asking you to give it away," my mother snapped, annoyed by my hesitation. "We are keeping it in the family. You are going to move into a nice, sensible apartment downtown. I already found a lovely little 1-bedroom unit that will be perfect for a single mother. It is close to the grocery store, and it is all on 1 floor, so you will not have to walk up and down stairs with the baby. You should be thanking me for figuring out the logistics." I felt my heart begin to hammer against my ribs. The sheer audacity of her demand was suffocating. I had spent years dealing with her blatant favoritism, watching her praise Brandon for simply existing while she scrutinized my every choice. But this was a new level of entitlement. "Mom, I bought this house," I said, my voice trembling slightly with suppressed anger. "I put down the deposit. I pay the mortgage. This is my home. I just had a baby 3 weeks ago. I am not moving out so Brandon can have my house." My mother's face flushed with anger. Her posture went rigid and she took a step toward me, towering over me in her heels. "Do not be selfish, Rachel," she scolded, her tone dripping with venom. "Your brother is going through a massive professional transition. He is building an empire for this family. He needs a peaceful, spacious environment to focus on his work." "You do not need a historic 4-bedroom home." Vanessa chimed in from the kitchen, opening my refrigerator and peering inside as if she already lived there. "Honestly, Rachel, it is a little ridiculous that you bought this massive place anyway. It is way too much upkeep for one person. We are actually doing you a favor taking it off your hands. My kids will absolutely love that backyard, and the local school district is so much better for them." I could not believe what I was hearing. They were discussing my home, the sanctuary I had poured my life savings into, as if it were a hand-me-down sweater I had outgrown. "I am not a single person," I said fiercely, looking down at my son. "I have Leo. This is his home. I designed that nursery for him. David and I picked out this house for him." Bringing up David's name was a mistake. I knew it the moment the words left my mouth. My mother's eyes narrowed and she seized the opportunity to strike exactly where it hurt the most. "David is gone, Rachel," my mother said coldly, devoid of any basic human empathy. "It is tragic, yes, but it is reality. You are a single mother now. You do not have a partner to help you maintain a property like this. You are grieving, you are emotional, and you are clearly not thinking straight. A tiny apartment is exactly what you need right now." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "I am thinking perfectly straight," I countered, my voice gaining strength. "I am perfectly capable of maintaining my own home. I have a highly successful career. I am financially secure. Brandon is the one who cannot maintain his life." My mother scoffed, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. "Oh, please. You draw pictures for a living." "I am a medical illustrator." I corrected her, the familiar frustration rising in my chest. "I hold patents on anatomical illustrations used in medical textbooks and surgical software all over the world. It is a highly specialized, lucrative field. I make more than enough to support myself and my son. Drawing pictures of cells is not a real career, Rachel," my mother dismissed instantly, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. "It is a cute little hobby that somehow pays your bills. But Brandon is an entrepreneur. He is a visionary. He deals in high-stakes technology and corporate investments. He is doing things that actually matter. He just needs a stable place to land right now so he can launch his next big venture." I looked at Vanessa, who was now measuring the dimensions of my living room windows with a tape measure she had apparently brought in her designer bag. She was actively ignoring the conflict, completely secure in the belief that my mother would bully me into submission just like she always did. "You are out of your mind," I said to my mother, shaking my head in disbelief. "You come into my house, wake up my newborn baby, insult the father of my child, demean my career, and demand that I pack up my entire life and move into a one-bedroom apartment so your 36-year-old son does not have to face the consequences of his own financial failures." My mother stepped closer, closing the distance between us until I could smell her heavy floral perfume. She looked down at me with absolute contempt, weaponizing my grief and my exhaustion in one final brutal blow. "Stop being so dramatic and listen to me," she hissed, her voice low and threatening. "Your brother's family is a real family. They have a mother, a father, and 2 growing children who need space. You are a single woman with a fatherless infant. Brandon's kids need a yard. You just draw pictures of cells for a living. Make room." The air in my living room grew completely still. The silence ringing in my ears was only broken by the soft, rhythmic breathing of my son against my chest. Did she really just call my son a fatherless infant? Did she truly believe her cruel words would suddenly break my spirit and force me to surrender the roof over my child's head? I stared at the woman who had given birth to me, searching her face for any trace of maternal warmth, any hint of empathy for a woman who had just buried her partner and given birth entirely alone. There was nothing. Her eyes held only the cold, calculating determination of someone who viewed me not as a daughter, but as an obstacle in Brandon's path. My grief, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket for the past 4 months, instantly burned away. In its place, a fierce, protective rage ignited inside my chest. This was no longer just about me enduring her lifelong favoritism. This was about Leo. This was about the safe haven David and I had built for him. I adjusted my grip on my baby, making sure his head was securely cradled, and I took a step forward. My exhaustion vanished entirely. "Get out," I said. My voice was dangerously quiet, lacking the trembling fear she was so used to hearing. My mother blinked, clearly taken aback by my tone. "Excuse me," she snapped, her posture going rigid. "I said get out of my house," I repeated, enunciating every single word with absolute clarity. "You do not get to come into my home, insult my dead partner, belittle my child, and demand my property. I am not a teenager you can bully into submission anymore. I am a 33-year-old woman, and you are currently trespassing on my property." Vanessa stopped measuring the windows and turned around, letting out a sharp, mocking sigh. "Oh, please, Rachel, stop throwing a tantrum. Nobody is trying to insult you. We are just being practical. Brandon is the head of a family. You are just one person. It is incredibly selfish of you to hoard a 4-bedroom historic colonial when you know your brother is struggling." I turned my gaze to Vanessa, narrowing my eyes at her entitled expression. "You do not get to speak to me in my own home, Vanessa. You and Brandon have burned through 3 businesses, 2 luxury condos, and countless bailouts from my mother. Your inability to manage your finances does not constitute an emergency on my part. If you need a place to live, go rent the tiny apartment downtown that you so generously selected for me." Vanessa gasped, her hand flying to her chest in feigned outrage. "Barbara, are you going to let her speak to me like that?" My mother stepped between us, puffing out her chest. "How dare you speak to your sister-in-law that way? They are going through a transition. Family helps family. Family does not steal from family," I fired back. "I am not making room for Brandon. I am never moving out of this house. Take your flattened boxes, turn around, and walk out my front door before I call the police and have you removed." For a moment, my mother just stared at me. Then a slow, malicious smile spread across her face. She reached into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out a heavy metal keychain. They jingled sharply as she dangled them in the air right in front of my face. "You can call the police all you want, Rachel." My mother laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made my blood run cold. "But they are not going to do anything. You seem to have forgotten how things work in this family." I stared at the keys in her hand. They were the emergency spare keys I had given her when I was 8 months pregnant, terrified of going into early labor alone. I had trusted her in a moment of intense vulnerability, hoping that a looming childbirth might finally spark some maternal instinct in her. I had been horribly wrong. "Those are my keys," I demanded, reaching out my free hand. "Give them back to me right now." My mother yanked her hand away, gripping the keys tightly in her fist. "No," she said firmly. "These are family keys to a family house. You think you are so smart and independent, Rachel, but you seem to have convenient amnesia about how you bought this property." "I bought this property with the money I earned from my medical patents," I stated, staring her down. "I paid fair market value for it." My mother scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "You bought it directly from your grandfather's estate before it went on the open market." "Do you really think I did not notice that? I paid for half of this house when your grandfather died. That estate money belongs to the family. By default, this property is a family asset. You are merely holding it in trust for us. And right now, the family requires you to vacate." Her delusion was absolutely staggering. When my grandfather passed away, his estate had been a complicated mess. He had left behind several properties, including this historic colonial. Because I loved the house, I had approached the estate lawyers and purchased it legally out of my own pocket at full market value. The funds from that purchase went directly into the estate trust, which my mother had subsequently drained to fund Brandon's luxurious lifestyle. She had never contributed a single dime to the purchase of my home. Her name was nowhere on the deed. Her logic was not just flawed, it was entirely fabricated to justify her blatant theft. "You are completely delusional," I told her, not backing down an inch. "The estate lawyers facilitated the sale. My name is the only name on the deed. You do not own a single brick of this house. We will see what a judge has to say about that." My mother threatened, stepping closer until she was invading my personal space. "But until then, I am your mother, and I make the decisions regarding family assets. Brandon's lease is up on Thursday. They are moving in on Friday morning." She turned her back on me, signaling that the conversation was over. She picked up her designer handbag from the entryway table and adjusted her coat. "You have 3 days to pack up your things, Rachel," my mother ordered, not even bothering to look at me. "I suggest you start with the kitchen. Brandon's children are picky eaters and Vanessa needs full access to the pantry. I will be back on Friday at 8 in the morning with the U-Haul. If you are not packed, we will pack your things for you and leave them on the curb." She marched toward the front door, pulling it open. The cold outside air rushed into my warm hallway, making Leo stir in my arms. Vanessa picked up her tape measure and followed my mother. Before she stepped over the threshold, she turned back to face me. She let her eyes slowly travel up and down my exhausted postpartum body, her lips curling into a wicked smirk. "Do not worry," Rachel, Vanessa said sweetly. "We will take great care of the garden. I know how much you loved planting those roses. Maybe we will send you a picture of the kids playing out there while you are stuck in your little apartment." I did not say a single word. I just stared at her with a blank, unyielding expression, until her smirk faltered slightly. She turned around quickly and hurried out the door, her heels clicking rapidly against the porch steps. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them, leaving me standing alone in the sudden silence of my hallway. The threat hung heavy in the air. Friday at 8 in the morning, 3 days from now. I looked down at Leo. He had finally fallen back asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. He was entirely dependent on me. I was his mother, his protector, his entire world. I had lost his father, but I absolutely refused to lose our home. The sun rose on Friday morning, casting a brilliant golden light across the frost-covered lawn of my historic colonial home. I was already awake. I had been awake since 4 in the morning, feeding Leo and mentally preparing for the battle that was about to unfold on my front porch. My house was completely silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the gentle breathing of my newborn son, who was safely tucked into his bassinet in the living room. Everything was in its proper place. The moving boxes my mother had dumped on my floor on Tuesday were gone, broken down, and thrown into the recycling bin. In their place, a sense of absolute calm permeated my home. The air felt lighter. The commercial-grade deadbolts I had installed on Tuesday afternoon gleamed solidly against the dark oak of my doors. The high-tech security cameras were fully operational, recording every angle of my property with crystal-clear precision. I stood by the kitchen window holding a warm mug of coffee, watching the street. At exactly 8 in the morning, the heavy rumble of a diesel engine shattered the quiet peace of my suburban neighborhood. I watched as a massive 26-foot moving truck turned the corner and slowly began backing into my pristine driveway. The loud, repetitive beeping sound of the truck reversing echoed off the neighboring houses. They had actually done it. My mother and my brother honestly believed they could just show up with a rented truck and force me out of the home I had purchased with my own hard-earned money. The sheer entitlement was almost breathtaking to witness. The moving truck finally hissed to a halt, taking up the entire length of my driveway. The heavy doors of the cab swung open. My brother Brandon stepped out first. He was 36 years old, but carried himself with the arrogant swagger of a teenager who had never faced a single consequence in his entire life. He was dressed in his typical tech entrepreneur uniform, consisting of an expensive quarter-zip sweater and designer sneakers, looking as though he was preparing to give a keynote presentation rather than move furniture. He stretched his arms and looked up at my house with a satisfied, greedy expression on his face. He pointed at the large wrap-around porch and said something to his wife Vanessa, who was climbing out of the passenger side. Vanessa looked annoyed, adjusting her oversized sunglasses and pulling her designer coat tighter around her shoulders. She barely glanced at the house before pulling out her phone. Finally, my mother Barbara emerged from the vehicle, following closely behind them. She walked with her head held high, acting like the general manager of a construction site. She was barking orders at Brandon, gesturing toward the front door, and pulling that familiar heavy metal keychain from her luxury handbag. They walked up the brick pathway together, completely confident, completely certain that I was sitting inside crying among a sea of packed boxes. They did not notice the new security cameras mounted under the eaves. They did not notice that the curtains were drawn back, revealing a perfectly clean living room with absolutely no signs of moving. I set my coffee mug down on the granite counter and picked up my phone. I opened the security application and watched the high-definition live feed of my front porch. The audio was crystal clear. "Let us just get this over with quickly," Brandon complained, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I have a meeting with some new venture capitalists at noon, and I need to be set up in the home office by then. Make sure she leaves the wireless router behind. I do not have time to call the internet company today." "Do not worry about it," my mother replied, waving her hand dismissively. "She is probably a complete mess right now. I will go in and handle her. You two just start opening the back of the truck." My mother stepped up to the front door and confidently inserted her emergency spare key into the deadbolt. I watched the camera feed intently, holding my breath. She turned the key. Nothing happened. My mother frowned. She pulled the key out, inspected it for a second, and then shoved it back into the keyhole. She twisted her wrist harder, pushing her body weight against the heavy oak door. The commercial-grade lock did not budge a single millimeter. "What is wrong with this thing?" my mother muttered, jiggling the handle aggressively. "The lock is completely stuck." Brandon sighed heavily and walked up the steps, pushing my mother aside. "Give it to me, Mom. You are probably using the wrong key." He snatched the keychain from her hand and shoved the key into the door. He twisted it forcefully, his face turning red with the effort. The metal scraped against the internal pins, but the mechanism remained completely locked. Brandon stopped. He pulled the key out and stared at the heavy brass hardware gleaming on my door. He looked closely at the shape of the keyhole and then looked at the key in his hand. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His arrogant expression vanished instantly, replaced by a dark, twisting fury. "She changed the locks," Brandon said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What do you mean she changed the locks?" Vanessa demanded, stomping up the porch steps. "She cannot do that. We have a lease ending today. We need to get our furniture inside right now. I am telling you, she changed the hardware," Brandon yelled, suddenly losing his temper entirely. "This key does not fit. The lock is completely different." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest in dramatic outrage. "She would not dare. Rachel, open this door right now. Open this door immediately." When I did not respond, Brandon completely lost his mind. The calm, charismatic tech bro facade crumbled, revealing the aggressive, entitled bully he truly was. He balled his hands into fists and began pounding violently on my solid oak front door. The heavy thudding sound echoed through the entire house, shaking the window panes and sending vibrations through the floorboards. Rachel, opened the door, he screamed, kicking the bottom of the door frame with his expensive sneakers. Open the door, you selfish brat. We know you are in there. You cannot lock us out of our own family home. Open the door before I break this window. The aggressive pounding was incredibly loud. In the living room, the sudden violent noise startled Leo out of his peaceful sleep. My newborn son let out a sharp, terrified wail, his tiny arms flailing in the bassinet. The sound of my baby crying in fear because of my brother's violent tantrum triggered something primal and absolute inside me. The last remaining shred of familial obligation evaporated completely. I walked over to the bassinet, scooped Leo into my arms, and held him tight against my chest to soothe him. I patted his back gently until his cries subsided into soft hiccups. I carefully placed him back into his secure sleeper, far away from the front entryway. Then I picked up my phone and unlocked it, opening the camera application. I hit the record button, making sure the video was capturing both the audio and the visual perfectly. I walked purposefully down the hallway toward the front door. The pounding was relentless. Brandon was screaming insults, calling me every terrible name he could think of, while my mother yelled empty threats about calling the authorities. I reached the front door and took a deep, steadying breath. I reached out and unlatched the heavy commercial deadbolt with a loud, definitive click. The pounding stopped instantly. I pulled the heavy oak door open, but kept my body positioned firmly behind the locked, reinforced security screen door I had also installed. I held my phone up, clearly recording their faces. Brandon was red-faced and breathing heavily, his fists still raised. Vanessa was glaring at me with pure hatred. My mother looked absolutely furious, her eyes darting between my phone and the new locks. "What do you think you are doing, Rachel?" my mother shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You have completely lost your mind. Turn that camera off and open this screen door right now. We have a moving truck sitting in the driveway, and we are on a very tight schedule." I looked directly at Brandon, keeping the phone perfectly steady. I did not raise my voice, I did not yell. I spoke with absolute calm, freezing authority. "You are currently trespassing on my private property," I informed them, my voice carrying clearly through the crisp morning air. "You do not have permission to be here. You do not have permission to touch my home. If you do not turn around and walk away from my porch immediately, I will press charges for trespassing and attempted breaking and entering." Brandon let out a loud, mocking laugh, throwing his arms out wide. "Trespassing? Are you joking right now? This is a family house, Rachel. Mom paid for half of this place. You cannot trespass family. Now open this door and stop acting like a dramatic lunatic. I have a business to run, and my kids are waiting at their grandparents' house. We are moving in today whether you like it or not." "You are going to regret this little stunt, Rachel," my mother added, her voice dripping with venom. "You are having a postpartum mental breakdown, and you are completely out of control. I am your mother, and I am telling you to unlock this screen door right this second before I take drastic measures." I kept the camera focused on their angry, entitled faces, capturing every single threat and demand. I did not engage with their insults. I did not argue about who paid for what. I simply stared at them through the reinforced mesh of the security door, holding my ground with absolute, unwavering certainty. "I am telling you one final time," I said, my tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "You have exactly 60 seconds to remove yourselves and that rented truck from my driveway. If you do not leave, I am calling the police, and I will show them this recording of you violently pounding on my door and screaming threats while my newborn baby is inside. The countdown starts right now." Brandon stepped forward, grabbing the handle of the security screen door and violently rattling it, trying to force it open. It did not budge. The reinforced steel held firm against his weight. He looked through the mesh, his eyes wide with unhinged fury. "You are nothing but a selfish, jealous failure," he spat, the venom clear in his voice. "You think you can keep this huge house all to yourself just because you drew some stupid pictures? You are going to be completely alone, Rachel. No one in this family will ever speak to you again. You are dead to us. Good, I replied without blinking. Then getting off my property should be very easy for you. You have 40 seconds left. The standoff reached a breaking point. My mother, Brandon, and Vanessa stood on the porch, vibrating with rage, completely unable to comprehend that their bullying tactics were no longer working. The power dynamic had permanently shifted, and they were entirely powerless against a locked door and a recording camera. 30 seconds, I announced, keeping the phone lens squarely on my mother's face. Barbara's eyes widened with a frantic, unhinged energy. The realization that I was genuinely going to let the police arrest her golden child shattered whatever remaining restraint she had. She turned to Brandon, pointing a trembling finger toward the large, decorative window adjacent to the front door. "Break it!" she ordered, her voice shrill and echoing down the quiet suburban street. "Break the glass right now, Brandon. Reach in and unlock the door. I am not playing these games anymore. I paid for half of this house from your grandfather's estate. She is just holding it in trust for the family. Do it." Brandon hesitated for only a fraction of a second before his arrogance overrode his common sense. He spun around and sprinted toward the open back of the U-Haul truck. Vanessa shrieked, telling him to be careful, but he ignored her, rummaging through the loosely packed equipment near the tailgate. He emerged a moment later, gripping a heavy metal tire iron. 20 seconds, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I did not flinch, nor did I step away from the security door. Instead, I used my left hand to pull my backup phone from my pocket. Without breaking eye contact with my mother, I dialed 911. Brandon stomped back up the porch steps, raising the heavy iron bar above his shoulder. He looked like a madman, his designer clothes completely at odds with the violent threat he was posing. "You brought this on yourself, Rachel," he grunted, swinging the iron bar backward to gain momentum. The emergency dispatcher answered on the second ring. I immediately put the call on speakerphone at maximum volume so the operator's voice filled the entryway. 911. What is your emergency? Yes, I need immediate police assistance at my address, I stated loudly and clearly. I have 3 hostile individuals trespassing on my property. They are actively attempting to smash my front window with a tire iron to break into my home. I am inside with a 3-week-old infant, and I fear for my safety. Brandon froze mid-swing. The metal bar hovered inches from the glass. "Officers are being dispatched to your location right now, ma'am," the dispatcher replied, her professional tone cutting through the morning air. "Are the individuals still trying to gain entry? They are standing on my porch with a weapon right now, I confirmed. My cameras are recording everything." The color drained from Vanessa's face. She grabbed Brandon's arm and tried to pull him backward down the stairs. "Brandon, stop," she called the police. "Put that down before you get arrested." Brandon dropped his arm, the heavy metal clanking against the wooden deck. He looked at the tire iron, then at my phone, and finally at the camera mounted above the door. Panic began to replace his rage. My mother, however, was entirely blinded by her own delusion. She stepped directly in front of the camera, waving her hands frantically. "Tell the police to hurry up," she yelled at the phone. "Tell them to come arrest my daughter. She is stealing family property. She is holding my house hostage. I want her removed immediately." The dispatcher advised me to stay inside and keep the doors locked until officers arrived. I thanked her and disconnected the call, leaving the camera rolling. We stood in tense silence for the next 4 minutes. Neighbors were beginning to step out onto their porches, drawn by the yelling and the massive moving truck blocking the street. I could see Mrs. Higgins from next door holding her phone, clearly watching the spectacle unfold. The wail of approaching sirens broke the quiet. 2 police cruisers turned the corner rapidly, their lights flashing brightly in the morning sun. They pulled up directly behind the U-Haul, blocking it from leaving. 4 officers stepped out, hands resting cautiously on their duty belts as they approached my front lawn. Brandon immediately shifted his entire demeanor. He dropped the tire iron into a nearby planter box and jogged down the steps to meet the officers, plastering on the charismatic, fast-talking persona he used to scam investors. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, smiling warmly, as if this were all a simple, amusing misunderstanding. "Officers, thank goodness you are here," Brandon said, his voice dripping with fake relief and concern. "I am so sorry for the commotion. We are just dealing with a very sensitive family emergency this morning. The lead officer, a tall, no-nonsense man, signaled for his partners to secure the area. Step back from the porch, sir. Who called 911? Brandon sighed heavily, rubbing his face in a theatrical display of exhaustion. My sister called, officer. She is inside the house. You have to understand she just had a baby a few weeks ago and she is severely postpartum. She lost her partner recently and the grief has completely fractured her mind. She is having a mental breakdown. We came over this morning to move her into a safer, smaller apartment so we could take care of the family property, and she just snapped. She locked us out and started acting hysterical. Vanessa nodded enthusiastically, stepping up next to her husband to play the supportive wife. It has been a nightmare, officer. We are just trying to help her. She is not thinking clearly at all. She is entirely unstable. My mother marched down the steps, crossing her arms defensively. This is my house, she announced to the officers, projecting absolute authority. I paid for half of this property from my father's estate. She is just holding it in trust. Now please break that door down and get her out of there before she hurts my grandson. She needs psychiatric help immediately. The lead officer listened patiently to their performance, his expression remaining completely neutral. He instructed them to stay by the moving truck, then walked up the brick path to my front door. He knocked firmly on the reinforced mesh. "Ma'am," he called out, "I am Officer Miller. Are you Rachel?" "Yes, officer," I replied, unlocking the security screen door and stepping out onto the porch. I was not crying. I was not hysterical. I was dressed in clean, comfortable clothes, holding my phone and a thick manila folder. I looked exactly like what I was, a calm, organized professional dealing with a nuisance. They claim you are having a mental health crisis and that this is a family property dispute, Officer Miller said, assessing my calm demeanor. Can you explain what is happening here? I handed the manila folder to the officer. My brother is lying, I stated clearly, making sure Brandon could hear me from the driveway. He is attempting to illegally break into my home because his business failed, and he is being evicted from his condo. My mother is enabling him. Please open the folder. Officer Miller opened the folder. The very first document was a certified copy of the property deed. As you can see, I am the sole owner of this property, I explained, pointing to the highlighted section. My name is the only name on that deed. If you turn the page, you will find the certified banking records and the closing documents from the title company. The officer flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the highlighted financial transfers. I bought this house at fair market value entirely with my own money. I continued, my voice ringing out across the lawn for the neighbors to hear. I am a patented medical illustrator and I have a highly lucrative career. I purchased the property from my late grandfather's estate legally. My mother never contributed a single dime to the purchase. She does not own this house. She has absolutely zero legal claim to it. Furthermore, I have security camera footage of my brother attempting to smash my window with a tire iron less than 10 minutes ago. Officer Miller closed the folder and looked back at Brandon. The charming, concerned brother facade had completely melted away from Brandon's face. He looked like a cornered animal. Vanessa was staring at the ground, suddenly very interested in her expensive shoes. My mother, refusing to accept reality, marched forward again. That paperwork means nothing. She stole that money from the family. I am telling you, I am the matriarch of this family, and I decide who lives here. Arrest her right now. Officer Miller turned to my mother, his patience entirely exhausted. Ma'am, you need to step back right now. I have reviewed the legal documentation. This property belongs solely to this young woman. You have no legal standing here. He turned his attention to Brandon, pointing a stern finger at his chest. Sir, your sister has video evidence of you threatening her property with a weapon. You are currently trespassing. I am ordering you to get in that moving truck and remove it from this driveway immediately. If you do not vacate this property in the next 5 minutes, I will arrest all 3 of you for trespassing, attempted breaking and entering, and filing a false police report. Brandon's jaw dropped. He looked at the officer, then at me, then at the massive U-Haul truck blocking the street. The reality of his absolute failure finally crashed down on him. There was no way to talk his way out of this. There was no way to bully a police officer holding a certified property deed. The public humiliation was profound. Neighbors were standing on their lawns watching the local golden boy and his wealthy mother get publicly reprimanded by law enforcement. Brandon turned bright red, practically vibrating with humiliation and suppressed rage. He spun around, grabbed Vanessa by the arm, and stormed toward the cab of the moving truck without saying another word. Vanessa scrambled into the passenger seat, hiding her face from the watching neighbors. My mother, however, could not leave quietly. She stood on the edge of my driveway, shaking with a fury so intense she looked physically ill. Her entire worldview, the delusion that she controlled me and everything I owned, had just been publicly shattered by the daughter she despised. She pointed a trembling finger at me, ignoring the police officers standing nearby. "You will regret this, Rachel," she screamed, her voice cracking with raw malice. "You think you have won, but you have no idea what I can do. I will make sure you have absolutely nothing. I will ruin you. You will be begging me for help before the year is over." I did not respond. I simply stood on my porch holding my folder and watched in silence as Brandon aggressively threw the moving truck into reverse. The massive vehicle lurched backward, nearly hitting the police cruiser, before pulling out into the street and speeding away. The officers stayed until the truck turned the corner, ensuring the threat was gone. Officer Miller returned my folder, advised me to keep my doors locked, and provided a business card with a case number should they return. I thanked him, walked back inside, and finally locked the heavy commercial deadbolt. The silence of the house wrapped around me like a protective blanket. I walked to the bassinet, picked up Leo, and held him close. We were safe. The first battle was over, and I had won completely. But my mother's threat echoed in my mind. She was not the type of woman to accept defeat gracefully. She was vindictive, calculating, and desperate. I spent the rest of the day nursing Leo, organizing my medical illustration contracts, and enjoying the profound peace of my secure home. I felt victorious, believing the worst was behind me. That night, the illusion of safety shattered. I was sitting in the nursery, feeding Leo in the dim light of a small lamp. The house was quiet, the storm outside rattling the window panes gently. My phone, sitting on the side table, suddenly vibrated with an urgent alert. I picked it up, expecting an email from a client. Instead, it was an automated security alert from my primary financial institution. The notification flashed across the screen in stark red text. "Urgent security alert. Multiple failed login attempts detected. Someone is attempting to reset the password and access the closed estate trust account of Walter Harrington." My blood ran cold. The account belonged to my late grandfather. It was the exact trust account where the funds from my house purchase had been deposited years ago. The account was supposed to be sealed, legally locked away after the estate was settled. Only 2 people possessed the routing numbers and the legal knowledge necessary to even attempt accessing those specific archived records. One was the estate lawyer. The other was my mother. I stared at the glowing screen in the dark nursery. She was not just angry. She was actively hunting for money. She was trying to breach a closed legal trust in the middle of the night. The realization hit me with terrifying clarity. Brandon and my mother were not just looking for a free place to live. They were completely desperate, backed into a corner, and scrambling for cash. This was not about family dynamics anymore. This was a financial emergency, and they were willing to commit federal fraud to solve it. I held Leo tighter against my chest, the protective rage flaring up brighter than ever. I locked my phone screen, my mind already calculating my next move. The war had not ended on my front porch. It had just moved into the shadows. I needed to call my lawyer immediately. I needed to know exactly what kind of financial ruin my mother was trying to cover up. The morning sun pierced through the gaps in the nursery blinds, casting sharp lines of light across the hardwood floor. I sat in the rocking chair, sleeping Leo warm against my chest, and stared at the dark screen of my phone resting on the side table. The digital clock on the wall read 6 in the morning. I had not slept a single minute since the security alert flashed across my screen at midnight. The attempted breach of my late grandfather's sealed trust account had kept my mind racing with terrifying permutations of what my mother and brother were actually planning. When I finally reached over and tapped the screen of my phone, the device practically vibrated out of my hand. The notification panel was a solid wall of alerts, a cascading waterfall of digital outrage. I had over 80 unread text messages, 40 missed calls, and hundreds of social media notifications. The assault had begun. I opened my text messages first. The family group chat titled Harrington Family Circle was an absolute war zone. Aunt Martha had sent a massive paragraph at 3 in the morning, demanding to know how I could be so incredibly heartless. She accused me of turning my back on my own flesh and blood during a minor transition period. My cousin Greg left 3 voicemails, the transcriptions revealing a tone of deep disappointment, telling me that grandfather would be disgusted by my greed. Even distant relatives I had not spoken to in years were chiming in, sending links to Bible verses about honoring thy mother and father, and warning me about the spiritual consequences of my selfishness. I switched over to the local community Facebook app. It did not take long to find the source of the sudden outrage. My mother had orchestrated a masterclass in psychological warfare. She had posted a lengthy, dramatic, and entirely fabricated story in our town's largest community watch group, a page with over 10,000 local members. The post was accompanied by a carefully cropped photo of Brandon standing in my driveway, looking exhausted and dejected, conveniently omitting the police cruisers and the massive U-Haul truck. My mother's post was a masterwork of manipulation. She claimed that I was suffering from severe postpartum psychosis and had violently locked my family out of our shared ancestral home. She wrote that Brandon, acting as a devoted brother, had simply come over to check on my mental health and bring me groceries only for me to call corrupt police officers to have him removed. She painted herself as a heartbroken grandmother weeping on the sidewalk, terrified for the safety of her newborn grandson, who was trapped inside with an unstable mother. The final paragraph was the most venomous. She openly claimed that I had used legal loopholes to steal the family property out from under them, leaving Brandon, Vanessa, and their 2 small children practically homeless on the street. The comments section was a nightmare of suburban gossip. Hundreds of people were sharing the post, offering prayers for my mother and condemning my actions. Vanessa had replied to dozens of comments, playing the exhausted, terrified mother, claiming she had to explain to her crying toddlers why their aunt hated them so much. Complete strangers were suggesting my mother call Child Protective Services to have Leo removed from my care. A hot flush of panic and anger burned the back of my neck. The urge to type out a furious response to post the security camera footage of Brandon wielding a heavy iron bar to scream the truth into the digital void was nearly overwhelming. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to destroy her carefully constructed victim narrative and expose the rotten core of her lies to everyone in that group. But I stopped. I looked down at Leo, his tiny fingers curled into a loose fist against my shirt. Engaging with them was exactly what my mother wanted. She wanted a public spectacle. She wanted me to act erratic and angry so she could point to my reaction and validate her claims about my mental instability. She wanted to drain my energy, distract me with social media drama, and force me to play defense. If I spent my day fighting ghosts on the internet, I would not be focusing on the very real, very dangerous financial moves she was attempting in the dark. I took a slow, steady breath. I systematically took screenshots of every text message, every voicemail transcription, and every single comment on that Facebook post. I captured the entire digital assault, compiling a massive portfolio of defamation and harassment. Then, with clinical precision, I turned my phone on silent, disabled all social media notifications, and blocked the numbers of every family member who had participated in the attack. The silence that followed was profound and empowering. I gently placed Leo back into his bassinet, ensuring he was comfortable and safe. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a large cup of black coffee, and pulled my laptop onto the granite island. It was time to stop playing by my mother's rules. It was time to go on the offensive. I dialed the direct line of my attorney, Harrison. He was an incredibly sharp, aggressive corporate lawyer who had handled the incorporation of my medical illustration business and the complex purchase of my house. He did not suffer fools, and he had absolutely zero patience for family drama, which made him the perfect ally for the war I was currently fighting. He answered on the second ring. "Rachel," he said, his voice crisp and professional. "I hope you are calling with good news about the baby, but given the time I suspect you are not." "Harrison." "I need your immediate assistance," I said, keeping my voice steady and devoid of the emotional turmoil raging inside me. "My mother and brother attempted to forcefully move into my house yesterday morning. When I refused them entry, my brother threatened my property with a weapon, and I had to have the police remove them." I heard the sound of a pen tapping against a desk on the other end of the line. "Are you and the child safe? Is the property secure?" "We are completely safe," I confirmed. "I upgraded all the locks and security systems on Tuesday. The police forced them to leave, and I have high-definition video of the entire encounter. But that is not why I am calling you right now. The physical threat is managed. It is the financial threat I need you to investigate." "Go on." Harrison prompted, his tone shifting into absolute focus. "Last night I received a security alert from the bank," I explained, pulling up the notification on my laptop screen. "Someone attempted multiple unauthorized logins to Walter Harrington's estate trust account. That account was legally sealed after I purchased this house from the estate. The only person with enough institutional knowledge to even attempt a password reset on that specific routing number is my mother. Furthermore, she has spent the entire morning launching a massive, highly coordinated defamation campaign across social media claiming I stole her inheritance and left my brother homeless." There was a brief silence on the line. Then Harrison spoke, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "She is trying to locate liquid capital. She is fishing for accounts she believes might still hold the proceeds from your real estate transaction." "Exactly," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "But here is what I do not understand. Brandon is supposed to be incredibly wealthy. He has a luxury condo downtown. He drives a car that costs more than my college education. He constantly brags about his tech startup securing new rounds of venture funding. Why on earth are they showing up at my door with a moving truck begging for a free place to live? Why is my mother risking federal wire fraud to access a closed estate account in the middle of the night? None of their behavior aligns with the successful image they constantly project." "You believe they are hiding a catastrophic financial event," Harrison deduced instantly. "I know they are," I insisted. "People do not act like cornered, desperate animals unless they are backed against a wall." "My mother is terrified. She is lashing out with these public smear campaigns to distract the extended family from asking questions about Brandon's actual situation. I need to know exactly what is going on behind their closed doors. I need to know why they are so desperately fixated on stealing my specific house right now." Harrison typed rapidly on his keyboard. "I can issue a formal cease and desist letter regarding the defamation by noon today. I can also contact the bank's fraud department to flag the unauthorized access attempts and ensure your mother is permanently locked out of any affiliated financial portals." "Do the cease and desist and lock down the bank," I agreed. "But that is not enough, Harrison. A warning letter will not stop her. She believes she is entirely above the law. I need you to dig deeper. I need you to hire a forensic investigator. I want a complete, comprehensive background check on Brandon's current business filings. I want to know the exact status of his luxury condo. I want to know if he has any pending litigation, any hidden bankruptcies, or any outstanding liens. And I want you to look into my mother's assets as well. She acts like she holds the purse strings, but I suspect she is bleeding cash to cover his failures. A forensic investigation of that magnitude will be expensive, Rachel, and it will require bringing in a specialized private investigator," Harrison warned. "Are you absolutely certain you want to deploy that level of resources?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life," I replied, my voice hard as steel. "She threatened to ruin me, Harrison. She told the police I was an unfit mother and tried to goad them into arresting me. She is attempting to weaponize my grief and my child to steal my home. I am not going to sit around waiting for her next attack. Find out what she is hiding. Find out what Brandon did to lose everything. I want every single receipt." "Consider it done," Harrison said. "I will contact an investigator I trust immediately. We will follow the money trail. I will call you the moment we have actionable intelligence. Lock your doors, document everything, and do not engage with their public provocations." I ended the call and closed my laptop. The morning sunlight now filled the kitchen, casting a warm, bright glow across the granite countertops. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. The digital storm of my mother's flying monkeys raged on in the ether, but inside these walls I was untouchable. I walked back into the living room and looked down at Leo. He was awake now, his dark eyes blinking up at the ceiling fan, completely oblivious to the war being waged over the roof above his head. I reached down and traced the soft curve of his cheek. My family thought they could break me with gossip and lies. They thought public shame would force me to surrender. They had no idea that I had just hired a professional to tear their entire fraudulent existence down to the studs. I was going to find their deepest, darkest secrets, and I was going to use them to ensure they never stepped foot on my property ever again. The next 48 hours moved at an agonizingly slow pace, dragging on with a heavy, suffocating tension that filled every corner of my home. I kept my phone strictly on silent, completely insulated from the digital circus my mother was actively conducting on social media. I absolutely refused to let the toxic noise of her flying monkeys penetrate the peace of my sanctuary. My best friend and neighbor Camilla proved to be an absolute lifesaver during this incredibly stressful period. She came over twice, bringing homemade casseroles, folding my laundry, and holding Leo so I could take a long, hot shower without constantly listening for his cries. She told me the neighborhood rumor mill was spinning, wildly fueled by my mother's dramatic Facebook posts. But I firmly asked her not to share any of the specific details with me. I needed complete mental clarity. My entire existence was temporarily reduced to caring for my newborn son, pacing the historic hardwood floors of my living room and waiting for my attorney to call. I knew Harrison was working relentlessly behind the scenes, deploying his best private investigator to uncover the truth. Every time my phone screen lit up with a spam email or a calendar notification, my heart would jump into my throat with anticipation. When my phone finally vibrated on the kitchen counter late Thursday afternoon, displaying Harrison's name, I snatched it up and answered on the first ring. Harrison did not bother with pleasantries or small talk. "I have the preliminary report from the private investigator." He stated, his voice tight with a level of professional disbelief I had never heard from him before. "Rachel, the situation is exponentially worse than a simple business failure. Your brother did not just experience a market downturn or a bad financial quarter, he orchestrated a massive financial catastrophe. Brandon is completely bankrupt." I sat down heavily at the kitchen island, staring blankly at the polished granite surface. "What do you mean completely bankrupt?" I asked, struggling to reconcile this devastating information with the arrogant, well-dressed man who had stood on my porch demanding my house just days prior. "He has a luxury condo downtown. He drives a sports car that costs more than my entire college education. He constantly brags at family dinners about his venture capital firm, securing new rounds of elite funding. It was all a meticulously constructed house of cards." Harrison explained, the sound of heavy paper files flipping echoing over the line. The investigator dug deep into his corporate filing, shell companies, and offshore accounts. Brandon's so-called tech startup was nothing but a front. He was running a highly illegal, fraudulent cryptocurrency investment scheme. He operated a classic Ponzi structure. He promised impossible double-digit returns to private investors, using new incoming money to pay off the older investors, while skimming enormous management fees off the top to fund his lavish lifestyle. When the crypto market dipped severely last quarter, his investors panicked and demanded their capital back. The liquidity was simply not there. The entire fraudulent operation collapsed overnight. He lost his luxury condo to the bank 3 weeks ago. His expensive cars were forcefully repossessed. He is currently facing multiple aggressive civil lawsuits from powerful defrauded investors, and the investigator strongly suspects federal authorities are actively building a massive wire fraud case against him as we speak. Brandon is not just broke, Rachel. He is facing potential federal prison time. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me entirely cold. My golden child brother, the untouchable genius of the family, was a common con artist. He had built his entire identity on theft and deception. All those years my mother had praised his brilliant entrepreneurial spirit, he had actually been stealing from innocent people. But that does not explain my mother. I said, my mind racing to connect the final pieces of this horrifying puzzle. Why is she involved in this disaster? She owns her house free and clear. My father paid off that mortgage 20 years ago before he passed away. She has no debt. Why does she need my house so desperately that she would risk police involvement? Harrison let out a heavy, dark sigh that sent a terrifying chill down my spine. This is the part that is going to make you incredibly angry, Rachel. Your mother does not own her house anymore. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. Explain that to me, Harrison. Right now. When Brandon's fraudulent scheme collapsed, he needed an immediate massive influx of cash to pay off the most aggressive investors and retain high-powered criminal defense attorneys, Harrison detailed. He went to your mother crying for a bailout, and your mother, in her infinite, unquestioning devotion to her golden child, decided to save him at any cost. She took out a massive, predatory reverse mortgage on her fully paid-off home. She legally signed away the entire equity of the house she had lived in for decades. She took every single penny from that predatory loan and transferred it directly into Brandon's failing holding company. My breath caught sharply in my throat. She gave him everything. She gave him absolutely everything, Harrison confirmed, his tone grim. And Brandon lost it all within a month. The money completely burned up in legal fees, silent settlements, and trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. Because your mother signed a highly aggressive, high-interest loan with a predatory shadow lender, she defaulted almost immediately when she could not meet the hidden stipulations and balloon payments. The lender initiated active foreclosure proceedings last week. Rachel, your mother and your brother are not just looking to downgrade to a smaller property. They are exactly 9 days away from being physically locked out of that house by the county sheriff. They are about to be completely homeless. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The room seemed to tilt as the horrifying reality settled over me. My mother had willingly sacrificed her own financial security, her own home, her entire future, just to shield her golden child from the consequences of his criminal actions. She threw away her entire life for him without a single second thought. And when the dust settled and she was left with absolutely nothing, she looked around for a convenient lifeboat. She looked at me. She intended to steal my home, displace her grieving daughter, and throw her newborn grandson into a tiny, dangerous apartment, all to cover the staggering losses of her beloved son. I was nothing but collateral damage to them. I was the designated sacrifice expected to pay the ultimate price for Brandon's crimes. I opened my laptop and logged into my primary business banking portal. I stared at the numbers glowing brightly on the screen. Years of careful, aggressive saving, the massive royalty payouts from my international medical patents, the steady, highly lucrative income from my global illustration agency. I possessed significant, highly liquid capital. My mother thought I was just a silly girl who drew pictures of cells. She fundamentally underestimated me. She had absolutely no idea the kind of financial firepower I had quietly amassed while she was busy praising Brandon's fake empire. Harrison. I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that I barely recognized as my own. Who holds the debt on my mother's house? I need the exact name of the predatory lending company that initiated the foreclosure proceedings. Harrison rattled off the name of a notorious aggressive private equity firm known for buying up bad debt and mercilessly evicting vulnerable homeowners. They are ruthless, Rachel. They do not negotiate. I looked over at my sleeping son, safe and warm in his bassinet, and then back at the massive balance in my checking account. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was a mother protecting her child, and I was about to end this war permanently. Harrison, contact that private equity firm immediately. I instructed, my tone absolute and unyielding. Tell them you represent an anonymous buyer operating through a newly formed LLC. Tell them I want to purchase the entire debt portfolio on my mother's property today. Do whatever it takes to fast-track the acquisition. I will pay the full amount in cash. I am buying her mortgage. The line went completely silent for a long moment as Harrison processed the sheer ruthlessness of my strategic directive. When he finally spoke, his voice held a mixture of deep professional respect and genuine astonishment. You want to buy the debt, he verified slowly. Rachel, if you do this, You will hold the deed of trust. You will legally become her bank. You will have the absolute authority to proceed with the eviction and seize the property. That is exactly the point, Harrison, I replied, my gaze fixed intensely on the screen of my laptop where my financial assets were displayed in stark black and white numbers. My mother stood on my front porch and screamed that she was the matriarch who controlled all family property. She tried to weaponize my grief against me. She looked at my beautiful, innocent newborn son and decided that our safety and our home were entirely expendable as long as her precious Brandon was protected from his own illegal choices. She engineered a vicious online smear campaign to ruin my reputation in our community, hoping public shame would force me to surrender my sanctuary. She played a dangerous game, assuming I was still the weak, compliant daughter she raised me to be. She was wrong. I am going to buy the debt on her house, and I am going to legally foreclose on her. She wanted to orchestrate an eviction so badly she is going to experience one firsthand. I need you to draft the incorporation documents for the LLC immediately. I continued, seamlessly shifting into the commanding executive mode that had built my career. Name the holding company, Leo Investments. Use my secondary commercial accounts to wire the necessary earnest money to the private equity firm within the hour. Do not let them know they are dealing with a family member. Frame this as a standard corporate debt acquisition. I want the paperwork expedited, and I want the legal transfer of the mortgage finalized before she even realizes what is happening. My mother sacrificed her own home for a criminal. Now she is going to pay the ultimate price. Make the call, Harrison. End this right now. I will not wait another day to secure my family's future and completely destroy the threat she poses to my son. 2 weeks passed in a state of suspended animation. The silence from my mother and brother was absolute and unnatural. There were no more banging fists against my commercial deadbolts. There were no more unhinged rants posted to the local community pages. The neighborhood had returned to its quiet suburban rhythm, and I spent my days focused entirely on my newborn son and my medical illustration contracts. I secured a massive new international client, pouring my late-night energy into rendering complex cellular structures while Leo slept soundly against my chest. Every few days I would check in with Harrison regarding the acquisition of my mother's predatory debt. The bureaucratic wheels of private equity firms turned slowly, but Harrison assured me the LLC formation was complete and the funds were securely locked in escrow. We were simply waiting for the final signatures from the shadow lender to officially transfer the deed of trust into my control. I assumed my mother's silence meant she was busy packing her own belongings, preparing for her inevitable eviction from the home she had foolishly sacrificed for her golden child. I assumed she had finally realized the battle was lost. I severely underestimated the sheer depth of her delusion and the criminal lengths she was willing to traverse to get what she wanted. The illusion of peace shattered on a mundane Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen sterilizing baby bottles and listening to a podcast when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed from the front porch. I checked the high-definition security camera feed on my phone. A man in a cheap gray suit was standing on my welcome mat holding a thick manila envelope. He did not look like a delivery driver. He did not have the relaxed posture of a neighbor. He stood with his feet planted wide, his expression blank and impatient. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the front door, leaving the heavy security screen locked. I opened the inner oak door and looked at him through the reinforced mesh. "Are you Rachel Harrington?" The man asked, his voice monotone and practiced. "I am," I replied cautiously. "How can I help you?" The man shoved the thick manila envelope through the small mail slot at the bottom of the security door. It hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. "You have been officially served," he stated flatly. He turned on his heel and walked rapidly down the driveway, climbing into a rusted sedan and speeding away before I could even process his words. My heart hammered against my ribs as I bent down and picked up the envelope. It felt incredibly heavy, pregnant with a new, terrifying threat. I carried it to the kitchen island and tore open the flap. A massive stack of legal documents slid out, stapled together with aggressive precision. The letterhead belonged to a notoriously sleazy local law firm known for representing deadbeat landlords and ambulance chasers. I scanned the bold capitalized text on the first page, and the air completely left my lungs. It was a formal notice to vacate and a civil lawsuit filed directly by my mother, Barbara Harrington. She was officially suing me for immediate possession of my historic colonial home. She was demanding a court-ordered eviction, claiming I was an illegal squatter occupying a property that rightfully belonged to her family trust. I flipped frantically through the pages, my eyes scanning the dense, convoluted legal jargon. How could a legitimate lawyer file an eviction notice against the sole deed holder of a property? How could they possibly bypass the undeniable financial records, proving I purchased the house with my own money? The answer lay on the fourth page under a section labeled Exhibit A. It was a photocopy of a document titled Life Estate and Residency Assignment Agreement. The paper looked old, the edges digitally darkened to simulate age. According to the text, my late grandfather had allegedly signed a legally binding contract 3 months before his death. This fabricated contract explicitly granted my mother, Barbara Harrington, the absolute irrevocable right to assign residency of his historic colonial home to any family member she deemed fit, regardless of who eventually purchased or held the title to the property. The document claimed that my purchase of the house was strictly conditional, bound by this overarching life estate agreement that superseded my deed. At the bottom of the page was a signature that looked vaguely like my grandfather's distinct cursive, accompanied by a notary stamp dated 10 years ago. I stared at the fraudulent document, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. It was a complete fabrication. My grandfather and I had been incredibly close, bonding over our shared love of art and history. He had offered to sell me the house directly because he knew I cherished it, and he wanted the funds to secure his end-of-life care. He had despised my mother's financial recklessness and had specifically structured his estate to prevent her from controlling the hard assets. He would never, under any circumstances, sign a document giving her unchecked authority over my home. My mother had crossed a massive, terrifying line. She had hired a shady attorney to draft a completely fake legal contract. She had likely hired a professional forger to replicate my grandfather's signature. She was committing blatant, undeniable felony fraud, submitting forged documents to a civil court in a desperate, unhinged bid to steal my property and save her golden child from homelessness. She was leveraging the slow, overburdened court system against me, knowing that a judge would have to freeze the living situation until the authenticity of the document could be verified in a trial. The sheer weight of the situation crashed down on me, threatening to buckle my knees. I gripped the edge of the kitchen island, gasping for air, as a severe panic attack tightened my chest. I was 33 years old. I was a grieving widow who had lost her partner just months ago. I was 3 weeks postpartum, my body still healing from the massive physical trauma of childbirth. I was running on fragmented hours of sleep, exclusively responsible for keeping a fragile newborn infant alive. And now I was facing a drawn-out, vicious legal battle against a mother who was willing to commit federal crimes to destroy me. The stress was absolutely paralyzing. The thought of spending the next 6 months dragging a newborn into courtrooms, paying exorbitant legal retainers to fight a forged document, and living under the constant looming threat of a forced eviction pushed me entirely to the brink. I felt the fierce protective armor I had built over the last 2 weeks begin to fracture. The exhaustion was too deep. The cruelty was too profound. I slid down the front of the kitchen cabinets, sitting on the cold hardwood floor with the fraudulent lawsuit clutched in my trembling hands, and I finally broke. I buried my face in my knees and sobbed, overwhelmed by the sheer, terrifying magnitude of her malice. A sharp knock at the back door startled me. I quickly wiped my face, trying to compose myself as I stood up. It was Camilla, my best friend and neighbor. We had shared a property line for 3 years, bonding over our shared love of gardening and strong coffee. She had a spare key to the back gate, and she often popped over to check on me since David passed away. Camilla took one look at my red, tear-stained face and the massive stack of legal documents scattered across the kitchen island, and her warm, friendly expression vanished, replaced by fierce, protective determination. She dropped her tote bag on the floor. and walked straight over to me, wrapping her arms around my shaking shoulders. "What did she do now?" Camilla asked, her voice steady and grounding. I handed her the forged life estate agreement. "She is suing me for eviction," I choked out, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. "She fabricated a contract. She forged my grandfather's signature. She hired a shady lawyer to drag me into court so Brandon can take the house." "Camilla, I am so tired. I cannot fight a 6-month legal battle. I just want to be left alone with my son. I do not have the energy for this at all anymore. It is too much to carry alone while raising a newborn baby." Camilla read the document quickly, her eyes narrowing with intense disgust. She tossed the fake contract onto the counter as if it were coated in poison. She walked into the living room, gently lifted a waking Leo from his bassinet, and brought him back into the kitchen. She expertly settled the baby against her shoulder, swaying him into immediate contentment. "Listen to me right now, Rachel," Camilla said, pointing a firm finger at my chest. "You are not going to break. You are not going to surrender. That woman is a monster, and she is banking on your exhaustion. She is counting on you being too tired and too scared to fight back. She wants you to fold. Are you going to let her win? Are you going to let that criminal brother of yours raise his kids in the house you bought for Leo?" I looked at my tiny son safely cradled in Camilla's arms. The image of Brandon and Vanessa laughing in my living room, tearing up the garden I had planted with David, flashed through my mind. The despair immediately evaporated, replaced once again by that cold, unyielding rage. "No," I whispered, wiping the last tear from my cheek. "I am not letting them take anything." "Exactly," Camilla said, offering me a fierce, proud smile. "You go upstairs, take a hot shower and wash your face. Put on your professional clothes. I am taking Leo to my house for the rest of the afternoon. He will be perfectly safe, well-fed, and happy. You need total silence and absolute focus. You are going to sit at your desk. You are going to call your bulldog of a lawyer, and you are going to figure out exactly how to destroy this fake lawsuit before it even begins. Do not let her see you bleed, Rachel. Make her pay." I nodded, feeling a massive surge of renewed strength coursing through my veins. Having an ally, having someone who truly saw me and supported me without condition, was the exact lifeline I needed. Camilla packed up Leo's diaper bag and headed out the back door, leaving me alone in the quiet, secure house. I walked upstairs, stood under the scalding hot water of the shower, and let the remaining fear wash down the drain. I dressed in my sharpest blazer, pulled my hair back into a tight bun, and walked into my home office. I picked up my phone and dialed Harrison's direct line. I was ready to strategize. I was ready to completely dismantle my mother's forgery and unleash the full devastating power of the secret weapon I had quietly purchased 2 weeks ago. Harrison answered immediately. "Rachel," he said, "I have excellent news regarding the LLC acquisition." "I need the good news, Harrison," I replied, staring at the fraudulent eviction notice on my desk. "Because a process server just handed me a forged contract, and my mother is officially trying to steal my home through the court system. Tell me we have the ammunition to end this today." The drive to the downtown financial district gave me time to process the sheer audacity of my mother's actions. She had not merely threatened me with empty words on a porch. She had actively engaged the legal system, committing a felony to displace her own daughter and newborn grandson. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, but my mind was completely clear. The crushing weight of postpartum exhaustion had been entirely burned away by a cold, calculating drive to protect my child at all costs. Harrison's office was situated on the 40th floor of a sleek glass skyscraper, a testament to his ruthless success in corporate law. I bypassed the receptionist who knew me by name and walked directly into his expansive corner suite. The room commanded a panoramic view of the city skyline, but my focus was entirely on the massive mahogany desk in the center of the room. I dropped the manila envelope onto the polished wood. Harrison, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, picked up the stack of papers. He did not say a word for several minutes. He adjusted his glasses and meticulously examined the eviction notice, the lawsuit filing, and finally the fabricated life estate agreement. I watched his eyes scan the paragraphs. I expected to see concern or professional apprehension. Instead, a slow, dark smile spread across his face. He let out a sharp, incredulous laugh, shaking his head as he tossed the forged contract back onto the desk. "Rachel," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "I have seen some truly desperate legal maneuvers in my career, but this borders on absolute comedy. Your mother did not just commit fraud, she committed wildly incompetent fraud." I pulled up a chair and sat across from him, feeling a surge of vindication. "Tell me exactly what is wrong with it," I demanded. Harrison picked up the document again, pointing to the second paragraph with his luxury pen. "First of all, the legal boilerplate used here is entirely outdated. Whoever drafted this pulled a template from the internet that is not even legally binding in this state. The clauses regarding property assignment contradict current state property laws that were updated 5 years ago. Furthermore, the formatting of the signature block is completely inconsistent with the estate lawyer your grandfather actually used." He flipped the page, tapping the bottom corner where the signatures and the notary stamp were located. "But this is the absolute best part." Harrison continued, his voice dripping with professional disdain. "Look at this notary stamp." I leaned forward, inspecting the faded stamped ink. It bore a name I did not recognize, along with a registration number and an expiration date. "What about it?" I asked. "I ran a background check on this specific notary the moment you mentioned a forged document on the phone," Harrison explained. "The name belongs to a man named Gregory Vance. He is not a reputable legal professional. He is an associate of your brother. In fact, he is listed as a co-founder on 2 of the shell companies Brandon used to funnel money in his cryptocurrency scam. Gregory Vance had his notary license revoked 3 years ago for falsifying real estate documents. The sheer stupidity of their plan washed over me. They used a disgraced fraudulent associate from Brandon's criminal enterprise to forge a legal document against me. They actually believed a judge would blindly accept a fake contract notarized by a known con artist without anyone verifying the credentials. "They are incredibly desperate," I stated, leaning back in my chair. "They are throwing anything against the wall, hoping I will just surrender the house out of pure fear." "Exactly," Harrison agreed. "This lawyer they hired is a bottom feeder known for filing frivolous lawsuits to scare tenants into vacating. He likely did not even verify the document. He just filed what your mother handed him and collected his retainer. So we take this to the judge," I said, my voice firm. "We show the court that the notary is a fraud, the document is a fake, and we get the eviction lawsuit thrown out immediately." Harrison folded his hands on the desk, his expression sobering into serious legal counsel. "We absolutely will take this to the judge, Rachel, and we will easily win. I can file a motion for immediate dismissal based on fraudulent evidence. I can also refer this to the district attorney for criminal forgery charges against your mother, your brother, and Mr. Vance." He paused, letting the weight of the legal reality settle into the room. "But I need to be completely honest with you about the timeline. The court system is severely backlogged. Even with undeniable proof of forgery, filing the motions, scheduling the hearings, and getting a judge to officially dismiss the case will take time." "How much time?" I asked, dread creeping into my chest. "Realistically," Harrison replied, 6 to 8 months. During that time, the lawsuit remains active on the docket. Your mother will use that pending litigation to harass you. She will send her lawyer to depose you. She will demand mediation. She will use the legal system to force you into a room with her over and over again, draining your energy, your finances, and your peace of mind while you are trying to raise your son. We will win, Rachel, but it will be a long, exhausting war of attrition." The thought of spending the first year of Leo's life trapped in a suffocating legal battle made my blood run cold. I imagined my mother constantly showing up at depositions, playing the victim, dragging my grandfather's name through the mud, and forcing me to constantly defend my right to exist in my own home. I pictured the stress keeping me awake at night, the anxiety bleeding into my work, and the dark shadow of her malice hanging over my child's nursery. I looked at Harrison, the cold, protective rage solidifying every nerve in my body. I shook my head slowly, rejecting his timeline completely. "No," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "I am not doing that. I am not spending the next 8 months playing defense in a courtroom while she terrorizes my family. I am not giving her the satisfaction of thinking she has power over my daily life. Rachel, it is the legal process, Harrison cautioned gently. We have to follow the steps to clear the title dispute. I do not want to just win, Harrison, I said, leaning forward and planting my hands firmly on his mahogany desk. Winning implies a contest. It implies we are standing on equal ground and exchanging blows. I do not want to fight her. I want to obliterate her capacity to ever threaten me again. I want to strip away every ounce of power and leverage she mistakenly believes she holds. I want them to never come near us again. Harrison watched me, his eyes sharp and calculating. He recognized the tone in my voice. He knew I was no longer operating as a frightened victim reacting to an attack. I was operating as a highly successful executive executing a hostile takeover. I took a slow, deliberate breath, shifting the conversation entirely away from the fraudulent lawsuit. I looked him directly in the eyes. Did the strategic purchase go through? I asked. The atmosphere in the corner suite shifted instantly. Harrison's demeanor transformed from cautious legal counsel to an immensely satisfied executioner. A slow, predatory smile returned to his face. He did not say a single word at first. Instead, he stood up from his leather chair and walked over to a heavy fireproof filing cabinet in the corner of his office. He unlocked it with a specialized key and pulled out a massive black leather binder. He walked back to his desk and dropped the binder onto the polished mahogany surface. He placed his hand flat on the cover and slid the heavy legal binder directly across the desk until it stopped right in front of me. The acquisition finalized at 9 o'clock this morning. Harrison confirmed, his voice vibrating with absolute triumph. The wire transfer from Leo Investments LLC was accepted and fully processed by the private equity firm. The deed of trust has been legally reassigned and formally recorded with the county clerk. I stared at the black binder, feeling an incredible, overwhelming surge of power course through my veins. You hold the entire mortgage, Rachel Harrison continued, tapping the cover of the binder. You own the predatory loan your mother took out to fund Brandon's criminal enterprise. You own the debt, you own the interest, and you own the exclusive right to execute the active foreclosure proceedings. She thought she could steal your house using a fake piece of paper, but you just legally bought the roof directly over her head. I opened the binder. Inside were the certified original documents detailing my mother's catastrophic financial mistakes, the reverse mortgage contracts, the default notices, and the final assignment of debt listing my newly formed LLC as the absolute unquestionable owner of the property holding. She has absolutely no idea, Harrison added, sitting back down and crossing his arms. She believes she is fighting a faceless, ruthless corporate banking entity. She does not know that the entity currently evicting her is the daughter she just tried to destroy. I ran my fingers over the crisp, legally binding pages. My mother had spent my entire life making me feel small, powerless, and insignificant. She had weaponized her authority to protect a brother who did nothing but take. She had marched onto my porch and threatened to ruin me, confident that her cruelty would always win. She brought a forged piece of paper to a fight, I murmured, looking up at Harrison with a cold, unyielding smile. And I brought the entire bank. Rachel is now armed with the ultimate weapon. Prepare the formal foreclosure execution documents, I instructed, closing the binder with a loud, definitive snap. Draft the immediate notice of property seizure. I want everything perfectly legal, perfectly brutal, and completely undeniable. She wanted an eviction. She is going to get exactly what she asked for. The storm rolled in late Tuesday afternoon, bringing with it a torrential downpour that lashed violently against the historic windows of my colonial home. The sky turned the color of bruised iron by 5 o'clock, casting the interior of the house into deep, premature shadows. I sat in the center of the living room, illuminated only by the soft glow of a floor lamp, rocking Leo gently against my chest. The rhythmic drumming of the rain was usually a comforting sound, a natural barrier separating my peaceful sanctuary from the chaotic world outside. Tonight, however, the heavy weather felt like a prelude. I had spent the past week organizing my medical illustration files, reviewing the ironclad legal documents Harrison had finalized, and waiting. I knew my mother and brother would not simply sit in their foreclosed home and await their fate. Desperation breeds recklessness. My phone, resting on the arm of the rocking chair, suddenly vibrated violently against the upholstery. A stark, bright notification slashed across the dark screen. It was not a standard motion alert from the perimeter cameras. It was a high-priority proximity warning from the primary doorbell camera, indicating sustained activity directly on my front porch. I did not gasp. I did not flinch. I carefully placed my sleeping son into his reinforced bassinet, ensuring his swaddle was secure, and picked up the device. I unlocked the screen and opened the live security feed. Through the night vision lens, rain streaked across the frame in thick illuminated sheets. Huddled together under the protective overhang of my porch were three figures. My brother Brandon stood in the center, his expensive leather jacket soaked through at the shoulders, his face twisted into an ugly snarl of impatient rage. Standing slightly behind him, holding a massive black umbrella, was my mother, Barbara. Her jaw was set in a hard, determined line. The third figure was a man I did not recognize. He wore a heavy canvas utility jacket and a faded baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He carried a large, heavily scuffed tool bag slung across his chest. I watched as the stranger unzipped the bag and pulled out a heavy-duty cordless power drill. This was not a city official. This was a sketchy, unlicensed locksmith they had undoubtedly hired for cash. Someone willing to bypass standard legal verification to make a quick buck in the middle of a storm. They had decided not to wait for the court date. They were executing an illegal, forceful break-in. Brandon stepped squarely into the center of the camera frame, his face filling the screen. He looked completely unhinged, the arrogant tech entrepreneur persona entirely stripped away by the sheer terror of his impending federal indictments and homelessness. He held up a folded piece of paper, shaking it aggressively at the camera lens. "Rachel, open this door right now!" Brandon yelled. The high-definition audio picked up his voice clearly over the roaring wind and rain. "We are not playing your games anymore. We have a court order. A judge signed off on the life estate agreement this afternoon. We have the legal authority to take possession of this property immediately. Do not make this harder than it has to be. Open the door before we break the lock." It was a blatant, desperate lie. The courts were closed. Harrison had confirmed just hours ago that the frivolous eviction lawsuit was still stalled on the docket awaiting our motion to dismiss. There was no judge, no order, and absolutely no legal authority behind their actions. They were simply attempting to physically terrorize me into surrendering the house, betting that a single mother alone in a storm would panic and capitulate. Brandon turned to the locksmith and nodded sharply. "Do it," he ordered. "Drill it out. I am not waiting out here in the freezing rain." The locksmith stepped forward, raising the heavy power tool to eye level. He pressed the metal drill bit directly into the center of the commercial-grade deadbolt I had installed just weeks prior. The excruciating, high-pitched screech of grinding metal erupted through my phone speaker, setting my teeth on edge. The camera vibrated slightly from the intense pressure being applied to the heavy oak door. Sparks flew from the lock mechanism, illuminating the dark porch in brief, violent flashes of light. They were actively destroying my property, attempting to breach the final physical barrier protecting my newborn son. The average person might have panicked. A normal reaction would involve screaming, crying, or frantically dialing emergency services in a state of sheer terror. But I was no longer operating within the realm of normal reactions. The crucible of the past month had forged an absolute icy resolve within my chest. I watched the sparks fly from the deadbolt with profound, unsettling tranquility. The locksmith was struggling. The commercial-grade reinforced steel of the internal lock mechanism was designed to withstand aggressive, high-powered drilling. He was making noise, but he was not making immediate progress. I did not run to the door. I did not yell through the glass. I remained standing in the quiet safety of my living room, bathed in the soft light of the floor lamp, staring at the digital screen in my hand. I pressed my thumb firmly against the microphone icon on the security application, activating the two-way intercom system. "Step away from my door," I commanded. My voice projected from the external speaker mounted above the porch. It did not shake. It carried no trace of fear, no panic, no hesitation. It cut through the chaotic noise of the storm and the grinding drill with absolute freezing authority. The locksmith jumped, startled by the sudden booming voice directly above his head. He pulled the drill back, the screeching noise coming to an abrupt halt. He looked nervously at Brandon, shifting his weight. He had likely been assured this was a simple domestic lockout, not a contested hostile siege. "I am giving you one warning," I continued, my voice echoing loudly across the dark, rain-swept lawn. "You are committing an illegal break-in on a private residence. Step away from the lockpack, up your tools, and leave this property immediately." Brandon's face contorted with fury. He lunged toward the camera, spittle flying from his lips as he screamed into the microphone. "You do not own this house, Rachel. You are a squatter. We have the paperwork. We are coming inside right now, and we are throwing your garbage onto the street." "Drill the lock," he ordered the hesitant locksmith. "I am paying you triple. Drill the lock." "Drill the—" Before the locksmith could re-engage the tool, my mother forcefully shoved Brandon aside. Barbara stepped directly into the center of the frame. The heavy rain had soaked through the edges of her expensive umbrella, plastering her perfectly styled hair against her forehead. Her designer coat was dripping with cold water, but she did not seem to notice the freezing conditions. She leaned in so close to the camera lens that her features became slightly distorted. The facade of the concerned wealthy matriarch was completely gone, replaced by a raw, naked malice that was truly terrifying to witness. Her eyes burned with a dark, venomous hatred. She curled her lips into a slow, malicious grin, relishing the power she believed she held over me in this moment. "You are done, Rachel," my mother hissed directly into the camera, her voice a cruel, dripping taunt. "We are not waiting for a judge to tell us what we already know. We are not playing by your pathetic rules anymore. You thought you could disrespect me. You thought you could hoard family resources while your brothers suffered. You are nothing. You have always been nothing." She tilted her head, her smile widening into something grotesque and triumphant. "Pack your bags right now. Take your bastard child to a shelter for all I care. We are taking what is ours tonight, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop us. Start packing, Rachel. We are coming in." I stared at her face on the screen. The absolute cruelty of her words, weaponizing my son and my grief, hung in the digital air between us. She was entirely convinced of her own supremacy. She believed she had orchestrated the perfect ambush, utilizing the cover of a severe storm and a hired criminal to forcibly rip my sanctuary away from me. She anticipated my total surrender, waiting for the sound of my sobbing through the intercom, expecting me to beg for mercy or desperately negotiate for time. I did not beg, I did not cry, I did not flinch. I kept my thumb pressed firmly against the microphone button, preparing to deliver the final devastating blow. I was about to unleash the absolute destruction she had unknowingly brought upon herself. I took a deep breath. The endgame had officially arrived, and she was entirely unprepared. I stared directly into the digital eyes of my mother through the glowing screen of my phone. She was waiting for me to break. She was waiting for the sound of my sobbing to filter through the small external speaker above her head. The rain continued to pound against the roof of the porch, but my living room remained completely still and quiet. I did not feel any fear. I did not feel any lingering daughterly obligation. I only felt the cold, heavy weight of absolute certainty. I leaned slightly closer to the microphone on my device. "I own your mortgage." I spoke the 4 words with a voice so quiet and so devoid of any human emotion that it cut through the howling wind and the grinding drill like a physical blade. I did not yell. I did not scream. I delivered the statement with the clinical precision of a surgeon making a final, irreversible incision. The reaction on the porch was instantaneous. The heavy power drill abruptly stopped spinning. The sudden absence of the screeching metal left a strange, hollow void in the audio feed, filled only by the sound of the falling rain. The locksmith pulled the tool away from the ruined deadbolt. He looked up at the speaker and then looked over at my mother. He shifted his weight nervously, clearly sensing that the dynamic of the situation had just drastically shifted. He lowered the drill to his side and took a very deliberate step backward toward the edge of the stairs, separating himself from my family. My mother froze. Her malicious, triumphant grin dissolved into a mask of pure confusion. She blinked rapidly as the rain dripped from her hair and ran down her pale face. She tilted her head toward the speaker above her, trying to process the short sentence I had just delivered. She looked at Brandon, but my brother was staring blankly at the heavy wooden door, completely failing to understand the magnitude of what had just occurred. "What did you just say?" my mother demanded. Her voice had lost its confident venom. It was shaky and uncertain. She leaned back into the frame of the camera, holding her hand up to shield her eyes from the glare of the porch light. "Stop speaking in riddles, Rachel. Tell this man to unlock the door, or we are taking it off the hinges." I kept my thumb firmly pressed against the microphone button. I wanted to make sure they heard every single syllable of their impending ruin clearly. "I am not speaking in riddles," I replied smoothly. "I am giving you a highly specific financial update. 2 weeks ago, you orchestrated a massive smear campaign to force me out of my home. You fabricated a fake life estate agreement and filed a fraudulent eviction lawsuit. You hired a disgraced former notary to forge my grandfather's signature. You did all of this because you were desperate. You were desperate because you took out a predatory reverse mortgage on your fully paid-off home and gave every single penny to Brandon to bail him out of his collapsed cryptocurrency fraud scheme." Brandon physically jolted. He took a sudden sharp step back from the door, his expensive leather jacket squeaking loudly in the audio feed. His eyes went wide with sheer, unfiltered terror. He looked at my mother and then stared directly into the camera lens. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He knew I had uncovered the massive federal crimes he had committed. The arrogant tech bro persona completely vaporized, leaving behind a terrified, desperate man who was staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. "How do you know about that?" My mother gasped. She stumbled backward, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. "You have no idea what you are talking about. You are making things up to stall us." "I am not stalling you, Mom," I stated, my voice resonating with cold authority. "I hired a forensic investigator. I know that Brandon bankrupted himself. I know he lost his luxury condo to the bank last month. And I know that you signed a terrible high-interest loan with a ruthless private equity firm to save him. I also know that you defaulted on that loan almost immediately because you could not afford the balloon payments. The lender initiated active foreclosure proceedings on your house last week. You are about to be completely homeless. You decided to steal my house and displace your newborn grandson to cover your catastrophic financial mistakes." The locksmith did not hesitate. He heard the words fraud and foreclosure and immediately recognized he was standing in the middle of a massive criminal liability. He shoved his power drill into his canvas bag, zipped it shut with a loud tearing sound, and sprinted down the porch steps. He ignored Brandon yelling at him to stop. The man ran straight to his rusted van, jumped inside, and sped away into the stormy night, completely abandoning the job. My mother stood on the porch, shaking violently. Her designer coat was completely soaked, but she was shivering from a much deeper internal chill. She gripped the handle of her umbrella so tightly her knuckles were stark white in the camera feed. "That does not matter!" she screamed, her voice cracking with wild desperation. "My financial situation does not change the fact that we have a court order for this house. The bank is dealing with my property, but I am dealing with you." "You are not listening to me, Mom," I said. I let a slow, cruel silence stretch across the intercom before I delivered the final lethal blow. "The bank is not dealing with your property anymore. I am dealing with your property." I took the massive savings I earned from my medical patents, and I instructed my corporate attorney to contact that private equity firm. I formed an anonymous holding company called Leo Investments. Yesterday morning, my attorney executed a massive wire transfer and purchased the entire debt portfolio attached to your address. The private equity firm accepted the cash offer and officially reassigned the deed of trust. I took a deep breath, feeling the absolute power of the moment coursing through my veins. "I bought your predatory loan," I explained, articulating the words slowly, so they could penetrate her thick delusion. "I bought the high-interest debt you took out for a criminal. I hold the exclusive rights to the mortgage on your home. You gave up your house to fund Brandon's scams. I am the bank now, Mom, and I am foreclosing tomorrow." The silence that fell over the porch was absolute and utterly devastating. The roaring sound of the storm outside seemed to fade into the background. My mother stopped breathing. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her skin a ghastly chalky white under the harsh glare of the security light. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The sheer magnitude of the trap she had walked into finally crushed her. She had spent her entire life trying to control me, trying to diminish my worth, and trying to force me to surrender to her golden child. She had risked everything she owned on a single desperate gamble, and she had lost spectacularly. Brandon stared at her in absolute horror. He looked from my mother to the camera and back again. He realized that not only was he bankrupt and facing prison time, but he had also actively participated in the complete financial destruction of the only person who had ever protected him. There was no safety net left. There was no secret bank account to bail them out. There was no house to steal. There was only the cold, hard reality of total, absolute ruin. "You cannot do this," my mother whispered, her voice so faint the microphone barely picked it up. "You cannot take my home. I am your mother. You cannot put me on the street. You stood on my porch 10 minutes ago and told me to take my newborn baby to a homeless shelter," I reminded her, devoid of any sympathy. "You decided that my family was acceptable collateral damage for your mistakes. You made your choices, and now you are going to experience the exact consequences you intended for me." My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. Her fingers went entirely numb. The expensive smartphone she had been clutching in her hand slipped from her grasp. It plummeted downward and smashed violently against the concrete surface of the porch. The sharp cracking sound of the screen shattering echoed loudly through the intercom speaker. She did not even look down at the broken device. She just kept staring at the security camera, her eyes wide with a hollow, vacant despair. The matriarch who had ruled our family with an iron fist had been completely dethroned, stripped of her power, and left with absolutely nothing. Brandon grabbed his mother by the arm, shaking her slightly, as if trying to wake her from a nightmare. "We need to leave," he panicked, his eyes darting toward the street. "We need to get out of here right now before she calls the cops. Come on, Mom, we have to go." He pulled her towards the steps, but my mother was barely responsive. She stumbled forward, her umbrella falling from her hand and rolling away into the wet grass. She was entirely broken, a shell of the arrogant woman who had marched up to my door demanding my surrender. I kept my eyes fixed on the camera feed, watching them retreat into the storm. I did not feel any guilt. I did not feel any regret. I only felt the profound, fierce peace of a mother who had successfully defended her child's sanctuary against the wolves. They had tried to tear down my walls, and I had responded by buying the ground they stood on. I picked up my backup phone resting on the kitchen island. I dialed the local police precinct, completely bypassing the emergency dispatch. I asked to speak with the shift commander and calmly reported a hostile attempted break-in at my address by two known individuals who had previously been issued a formal trespass warning. I informed the police that I had high-definition video and audio recordings of the suspects attempting to drill out my commercial deadbolt, and I requested an immediate patrol car to secure the perimeter of my property and take a formal report for property damage. I placed the backup phone down on the counter. I looked back at the security application screen. Brandon was dragging my mother down the wet driveway toward their parked car. The storm was washing away the last remnants of their dignity. I moved my thumb over the screen and pressed the red button disconnecting the live audio feed. The intercom shut off with a soft, digital click. The connection was completely severed. I locked the phone screen and set the device down, walking quietly back into the living room where Leo was sleeping peacefully. The house was safe. The threat was neutralized. The ultimate destruction of my toxic family was now entirely in motion, and I would not lose a single second of sleep over their self-inflicted ruin. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers pierced the stormy darkness less than 5 minutes after I disconnected the intercom. I stood behind my front door, watching through the side window as two patrol cars blocked the end of my driveway. The officers moved through the rain, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. They intercepted the locksmith just as he attempted to reverse his rusted van down the street. I saw an officer tap on the driver window, demanding identification. The locksmith, terrified, surrendered without protest. He was pulled from the vehicle, searched, and issued a citation for attempted breaking and entering. Meanwhile, my mother and brother had not made it far. Their vehicle was parked haphazardly near the curb, blocked by the second police cruiser. Officer Miller approached the driver's side of their car. I could see Brandon waving his hands, trying to resurrect his tech entrepreneur facade. It failed. Officer Miller was unamused. He pointed sharply toward the main road, delivering a final trespass warning. They were escorted off my street, followed by a patrol car, to ensure they did not circle back. The flashing lights faded into the distance, leaving my neighborhood peaceful and secure once again. I slept surprisingly well that night, anchored by the profound safety of my locked home and the steady, comforting rhythm of Leo breathing in his bassinet. The next morning brought a sunrise and the swift execution of corporate law. At exactly 9 o'clock, a process server hired by Harrison arrived at my mother's house. She did not receive a phone call or a warning. She was served with the notice of foreclosure and intent to seize property. The stack of documents named Leo Investments, LLC, as the debt holder. The paperwork detailed her immediate default status, the timeline for the property seizure, and the mandate demanding she vacate the premises. My mother had tried to serve me with a forged eviction notice. I served her with a legal, devastating execution. Harrison called me to confirm. The server reported that my mother collapsed onto her front steps when she read the name of the LLC. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and my mother was entirely cornered. With her house legally slipping through her fingers and Brandon facing catastrophic federal indictments, she realized she had lost all leverage over me. But Barbara Harrington was a creature of social standing and manipulation. If she could not bully me privately, she would attempt to destroy me publicly, using the extended family as her personal jury. By Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Sarah. The message contained a screenshot of an invitation. It was a summons from my mother to every aunt, uncle, cousin, and family friend. She had booked a banquet room at the Oak Ridge Country Club, an absurdity, considering she was bankrupt and facing active foreclosure. The invitation was titled, Emergency Family Crisis Intervention. The description attached to the invite was a masterpiece of gaslighting and dramatic fiction. My mother claimed that the sudden grief of losing my partner had caused me to suffer a total, violent, psychotic break. She wrote that I was hoarding family assets, putting my newborn child in immediate danger, and using illegal, shady corporate tactics to steal the home she had lived in for 30 years. She begged the family to assemble so they could form a united front, stage an intervention, and save me from my own mental illness before I completely destroyed the Harrington legacy. She intended to spin a massive lie to insulate herself from the shame of her homelessness and Brandon's criminal exposure. She needed the family to view me as a greedy monster, so when the foreclosure became public knowledge, she would be seen as the matriarch robbed by her daughter. She knew I always avoided family gatherings. She assumed my fear of conflict in postpartum state would guarantee my absence, leaving her free to control the narrative without any pushback or contradiction. She was entirely wrong. I read the screenshot twice, memorizing the time and location. I did not feel the suffocating anxiety that used to accompany family events. I did not feel the urge to hide and cry. I felt a cool, analytical focus. I texted Sarah back, thanking her for the information, and asked her to keep my knowledge of the meeting confidential. I then called Camila. I asked if she could watch Leo on Saturday afternoon for a few hours. Camila agreed immediately, promising to keep my son safe, fed, and insulated from the toxicity of my blood relatives. Saturday arrived with bright, deceptive sunshine. I dressed with meticulous intention. I did not wear the comfortable, oversized sweaters of a tired new mother. I wore a tailored slate gray blazer, crisp black trousers, and modest, elegant jewelry. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, professional style. I looked like a woman who commanded boardrooms, negotiated international patents, and owned multiple real estate properties. I looked exactly like the threat my mother feared most. I packed a single thick leather portfolio and drove to Camila's house. I kissed Leo's forehead, handed over his diaper bag, and thanked my friend for being the true village I needed. Camila squeezed my shoulder, her eyes fierce and supportive, telling me to go finish the job and burn their lies to the ground. The drive to the Oak Ridge Country Club was short. I parked my car, gripped my leather portfolio, and walked through the grand double doors of the lobby. The concierge directed me toward the banquet hall at the end of the corridor. I could hear the low, anxious murmur of dozens of voices drifting through the heavy wooden doors. The entire extended family had shown up, lured by the promise of dramatic gossip and the compelling fiction my mother had spun. I pushed the doors open and stepped into the room. The transition was instantaneous. The collective murmur of the crowd died, replaced by a shocked silence. Over 40 aunts, uncles, and cousins turned to stare at me. They looked at my crisp suit, my steady posture, and my calm expression. I did not look like a woman suffering from a psychotic break. I looked like a woman walking into a business acquisition. My mother stood at the front of the room near a small podium, clutching a tissue. Her face went slack with absolute horror when she saw me standing in the doorway. Brandon sat in the front row, his posture rigid, his eyes darting toward the exit as if calculating his escape route. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen, likely already distancing herself from the sinking ship. I did not say a word. I did not offer any greetings or explanations. I simply walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. The crowd parted for me instinctively. I chose an empty chair in the second row, sitting down with perfect posture. I crossed my legs, placed the heavy leather portfolio on my lap, and folded my hands over it. I looked directly at my mother, raising a single eyebrow, silently challenging her to begin her performance. Trapped by her own orchestrated event, my mother had no choice but to proceed. She gripped the edges of the podium, her knuckles white, and forced herself to execute the desperate spin she had planned. She began to speak, her voice trembling with practiced theatrical emotion. She spoke of how deeply she loved me, wiping away non-existent tears. She told the crowd that the tragedy of losing David had broken my mind, claiming I was suffering from delusions of grandeur and severe paranoia. She spun a wild, fabricated tale about how I had violently attacked Brandon when he tried to bring me groceries, locking my own brother out in a storm. Then she escalated the lie. She sobbed openly, claiming I had hired shady corporate hackers to manipulate the family trust, illegally stealing the deed to her house out of pure unhinged spite. She painted a picture of a grieving, devoted grandmother who was about to be thrown onto the street by a daughter she no longer recognized. She begged the family to intervene, to force me into psychiatric care, and to help her save the family legacy from my supposed madness. Throughout the entire 20-minute performance, I sat in stoic silence. I refused to yell. I refused to cry. I did not shake my head, roll my eyes, or interrupt her monologue. I simply watched her with a cold, analytical stare, observing her desperate attempt to weave a net of lies tight enough to save herself. I let her dig her own grave, word by word, tear by fake tear. I waited patiently, knowing the truth resting in the leather portfolio on my lap was about to obliterate her entirely. Barbara's final breathless sob echoed through the expansive banquet hall, hanging heavily in the stifling air of the Oak Ridge Country Club. She bowed her head in a perfectly rehearsed display of maternal sorrow, gripping the polished edges of the podium, as if completely overcome by the tragic burden of a daughter lost to madness. A low, continuous murmur of sympathetic whispers rippled through the crowd of aunts, uncles, and cousins seated in the rows around me. Several older relatives turned in their chairs to shoot me glances laced with profound pity and deep, unsettling concern. They were fully primed, completely hooked by the masterful, manipulative performance she had just delivered. My mother had successfully painted me as a violent, unhinged woman, suffering from severe postpartum psychosis, a dangerous squatter who was ruthlessly holding her family hostage. I did not flinch under their judgmental stares. I slowly uncrossed my legs and stood up. The harsh scraping sound of my wooden chair pushing backward against the hardwood floor cut through the sympathetic murmurs like a gunshot. The room instantly fell dead silent. Every single eye in the banquet hall locked onto me. They expected me to scream. They expected me to throw a hysterical fit, to cry, or to physically attack my mother, validating every single lie she had just spun. Instead, I simply unzipped the heavy leather portfolio I had carried in. I did not rush my movements. I moved with the deliberate, unhurried grace of an executioner who had already secured a total victory. Inside the portfolio were 12 identical, professionally bound dossiers. I picked up the thick stack of documents and walked directly down the center aisle toward the front row where the most influential elders of the Harrington family were seated. I stopped directly in front of Uncle Arthur, my mother's eldest brother, and the undisputed, highly respected patriarch of our extended family. I handed him the top dossier without saying a word. I moved methodically down the row, passing a copy to Aunt Beatrice, Uncle Thomas, and my cousin David, who ran a highly successful corporate accounting firm. I made absolutely sure that every single person holding financial or social sway in our family had a physical copy resting in their lap. "What is this?" Rachel Uncle Arthur asked. His voice was cautious, his thick brow furrowed in confusion as he looked down at the heavy black binding of the legal dossier. "That is the absolute truth," I stated evenly, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the silent banquet hall. My mother just spent 20 minutes standing at that podium spinning a fascinating work of complete fiction. She claimed I suffered a violent psychotic break. She claimed I hired corporate hackers to illegally steal the deed to her home. She begged you to stage a crisis intervention. I do not need an intervention. I need you to open the dossier to page 1. My mother's face went entirely rigid. The color rapidly drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a ghastly chalky white. She stepped quickly away from the podium, her hands shaking violently at her sides. "Do not look at those," she shrieked, her carefully crafted facade cracking instantly. "She manufactured those documents. It is part of her paranoia. Give them back to her right now. Do not read them." Uncle Arthur ignored her frantic demands. He flipped open the heavy cover. Aunt Beatrice, Uncle Thomas, and Cousin David immediately followed suit. The distinct rustle of thick, high-quality paper echoed loudly through the tense room. "Let us address the most pressing lie first," I announced, turning my body to face the entire crowd. "My mother claims I violently attacked my brother and locked him out of our shared ancestral home out of pure, unhinged greed. I ask you to turn to page 3. You will find the certified notarized property deed to my historic colonial home. Directly beneath it, you will find the official bank wire transfers proving I purchased the property at fair market value entirely with funds from my own independent medical illustration business. My mother never contributed a single cent to the purchase. Her name is nowhere on the title. It was never a shared family asset." Cousin David quickly scanned the banking records, his professional eyes catching the indisputable official verification stamps from the financial institution. "These are certified bank records," Barbara David said, his voice dropping into a register of deep, undeniable suspicion. "Rachel bought this house legally and independently. Why on earth did you just tell us she was illegally hoarding a family trust property?" "Keep reading, David," I instructed coldly, not allowing my mother a single second to formulate a new lie. "Turn to page 7. That is where the reality of my brother's brilliant entrepreneurial empire is fully documented for your review." Brandon, who had been sitting frozen in the front row, suddenly jumped to his feet. His face was the color of ash, his eyes wide with sheer unfiltered terror. "Do not read that," he yelled, his voice cracking with pure panic. He lunged toward Uncle Arthur desperately, attempting to snatch the open dossier right out of the older man's hands. "It is fake. She is framing me. She made it all up." Uncle Arthur swatted Brandon's hand away with a fierce, authoritative glare that immediately stopped my brother in his tracks. Uncle Arthur adjusted his reading glasses and read the bold, capitalized text printed at the top of the page. The entire room held its breath. "These are federal indictments," Uncle Arthur read aloud, his voice trembling with a mixture of profound shock and dawning horror. He looked up, locking his furious eyes directly onto Brandon. "These are unsealed federal indictments for wire fraud and securities fraud. Brandon, this document says your entire technology startup was a massive Ponzi scheme. It says you are currently under active investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for defrauding private investors out of millions of dollars." A collective gasp ripped through the banquet hall. Aunts and cousins covered their mouths in shock. Brandon stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck, his legs hitting the edge of his folding chair. He looked exactly like a man who had just been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. He was completely exposed, and he had absolutely nowhere left to run. My brother is a common con artist, I declared, my voice slicing through the rising panic in the room like a blade. He bankrupted himself entirely. He lost his luxury condo to the bank last month. His expensive cars were forcefully repossessed, and when his highly illegal cryptocurrency scam collapsed, he went crying to our mother for a massive financial bailout. Which brings us directly to page 12. I turned slowly to look directly at my mother. She was gripping the edge of the wooden podium so tightly, her knuckles were stark white. She looked physically ill, her eyes darting desperately around the room, searching for an exit that did not exist. The proud, manipulative matriarch had been entirely stripped of her power. My mother stood at that podium and told you I used hackers to steal her house. I continued, ensuring every single person in the back rows could hear my words perfectly. Look at page 12. That is a certified copy of a highly predatory, extremely high-interest reverse mortgage contract. When Brandon needed immediate cash to silence his defrauded investors and hire elite criminal defense attorneys, my mother secretly signed away the entire equity of her fully paid-off home. She took every single penny of her retirement and handed it to Brandon, and he burned it all in 30 days. Aunt Beatrice let out a sharp, devastated sob, clutching the paperwork to her chest. Barbara, tell me this is a lie, she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. Tell me you did not mortgage the family house for this nonsense. It gets exponentially worse, Aunt Beatrice, I said mercilessly, determined to burn the entire illusion to the ground. Because she signed a shadow loan, she could never possibly repay the private equity firm initiated active foreclosure proceedings last week. She called this emergency intervention meeting today because she is exactly 4 days away from being legally evicted by the county sheriff and left completely homeless on the street. She needed you to think I was crazy, so you would take her in and fund her legal defense when the locks are changed. The room erupted into a chaotic frenzy of localized arguments. Relatives were pulling the dossiers from each other's hands, frantically reading the highlighted sections of the foreclosure notices. The absolute truth was laid bare in stark black and white ink, complete with county clerk stamps and official legal seals. My mother's carefully constructed narrative was completely and utterly annihilated. But what about the fake eviction? Uncle Thomas asked loudly, waving page 15 in the air to get my attention. Rachel, this page shows an active lawsuit filed against you by Barbara. That is the final piece of my mother's absolute desperation, I explained, gesturing toward the fabricated legal document in his hand. When she realized she was definitely going to lose her house, she decided to steal mine. She hired a disgraced former notary, one of Brandon's criminal associates, to forge our late grandfather's signature on a completely fake life estate agreement. She filed a fraudulent eviction notice against me, a newly widowed mother with a 3-week-old infant, attempting to throw me onto the street so Brandon could move into my 4-bedroom house. The disgust in the room became a tangible, suffocating force. Family members who had looked at my mother with deep sympathy just 10 minutes ago now stared at her with pure, unadulterated revulsion. She had crossed a line so vile, so entirely irredeemable, that there was absolutely no coming back. I did not let her drag me into a lengthy court battle. I concluded, closing my empty portfolio with a definitive snap. I took the substantial capital I earned from my medical patents, and I aggressively purchased her bad debt directly from the private equity firm. I bought her mortgage legally and above board through a holding company. I am not stealing her home. I am formally foreclosing on a defaulted loan to stop a criminal from stealing my child's sanctuary. Wait! A booming voice bellowed from the back of the banquet room. Uncle Richard, a retired dentist who had always loudly praised Brandon's financial acumen at family holidays, pushed his way aggressively down the center aisle. His face was mottled purple with intense rage. He marched directly up to Brandon, grabbing the golden child fiercely by the collar of his expensive quarter-zip sweater. My retirement fund. Uncle Richard roared, shaking Brandon violently back and forth. I gave you $200,000 last year to invest in your new cryptocurrency platform. You looked me in the eye and told me it was a guaranteed secure return. Where is my money, Brandon? What did you do with my life savings? Brandon stammered, his eyes wide with absolute terror, completely unable to form a coherent sentence. Uncle Richard, the market dipped unexpectedly. The funds are temporarily tied up in a liquidity pool. I swear I can explain everything. It is entirely gone, Richard. Uncle Arthur stated grimly, holding up the federal indictment papers for the angry dentist to see. This legal document clearly shows he used new investor capital to pay for his personal luxury cars and his penthouse. He stole your retirement to fund his lifestyle. The banquet hall instantly exploded into absolute chaos. Shouts of furious anger and loud demands for immediate restitution filled the air. Cousins were yelling obscenities at Brandon. Aunts were turning their backs on my mother in sheer vocal disgust. Uncle Richard looked like he was about to physically assault my brother right there in the front row. The carefully constructed, pristine image of the Harrington family golden child and the devoted, wealthy matriarch had been entirely burned to ash in less than 15 minutes. My mother stood frozen behind the podium, completely abandoned by her captive audience. The people she had desperately gathered to serve as her personal army had instantly transformed into a furious mob demanding justice for her son's crimes. She looked across the chaotic room at me, her eyes hollow and filled with the terrifying realization of total inescapable ruin. There was no exit. I did not smile. I did not offer any final dramatic parting words. The extensive evidence in the dossiers had done all the necessary talking for me. I simply picked up my leather portfolio, turned my back on them, and walked away. I walked calmly up the center aisle, moving smoothly against the tide of furious relatives rushing toward the front to confront the scammers. I reached the back of the banquet hall, where a small coffee station had been set up by the country club catering staff. I poured myself a fresh cup of black coffee. I pulled a crisp $20 bill from my blazer pocket and placed it firmly under the saucer, paying for my own drink. I pushed open the heavy wooden double doors and walked out of the banquet hall, leaving the roaring chaos of my toxic family trapped entirely behind me. I stepped out into the bright, clear sunshine of the parking lot, taking a deep sip of my coffee, knowing I would never have to see any of them ever again. The bright sunshine of that Saturday afternoon marked the end of the Harrington family illusion. I drove back to Camila's house, picked up Leo, and went home to a sanctuary that was finally permanently safe. But the shockwaves of the dossier I left behind at the Oak Ridge Country Club were only just beginning to tear through my family's lives. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely of their own making. By Monday morning, Uncle Richard had rallied over a dozen defrauded relatives and local business associates. They hired an aggressive litigation firm and filed a massive class action lawsuit against Brandon. The civil suit was just the spark that ignited a much larger powder keg. Brandon's desperate attempts to cover his tracks and manipulate liquidity pools were exposed to the harsh light of federal scrutiny. The Securities and Exchange Commission, having already been building a silent case, accelerated their timeline after the public explosion at the country club. 3 days after the family meeting, federal agents raided Brandon's leased office space downtown. They seized his computers, froze his remaining shell accounts, and officially arrested him on multiple counts of federal wire fraud and securities fraud. The golden child, the supposed tech visionary my mother had worshipped, was paraded out of his building in handcuffs, his face plastered across the local evening news. He was facing decades in federal prison, and this time there was no secret family trust account to bail him out. The total collapse of Brandon's empire was the final straw for Vanessa. She had happily turned a blind eye to his questionable business practices as long as the designer handbags and luxury vacations kept coming. But the prospect of being tied to a convicted federal felon, combined with the absolute loss of their social standing, was too much for her to bear. The afternoon Brandon was arrested, Vanessa packed her bags. She immediately deactivated all of her social media accounts to hide from the public humiliation and started selling off her designer handbags and jewelry, just to afford her divorce attorney. She did not visit him in his holding cell. She did not hire a defense attorney to help him. Instead, she took their 2 children, drove directly to her parents' house in the neighboring state, and immediately filed for divorce. She filed for sole physical and legal custody, citing his criminal activities and the devastating financial ruin he had brought upon their family. She completely severed all ties legally, abandoning Brandon to face his federal indictments entirely alone, without a single penny to his name and without a family to fall back on. While Brandon was sitting in a federal holding cell, my mother was facing her own inescapable reckoning. The timeline on the foreclosure execution I had initiated was absolute. The grace period expired, and the county sheriff arrived at the doorstep of the home she had proudly occupied for 30 years. It happened on a brisk Thursday morning. The neighborhood, usually quiet and serene, was treated to a spectacular display of consequences. My mother had spent the entire week in severe denial, desperately trying to call in favors from her wealthy social circle. She had called her country club friends, her bridge partners, and her charity board colleagues, begging for a massive personal loan to cover the defaulted mortgage. But the events at the country club had spread like wildfire. The entire local elite community now knew that Barbara Harrington had mortgaged her home to fund a massive cryptocurrency scam and had tried to forge legal documents to steal her widowed daughter's house. Her reputation was utterly annihilated. People she had known for decades blocked her number. The country club formally revoked her membership, citing the public disturbance. She was a social pariah, entirely toxic and completely isolated. When the sheriff knocked on her door, she had absolutely nowhere left to turn. The deputies gave her exactly 30 minutes to gather her essential personal belongings. She was forced to walk out the front door carrying a single suitcase and a plastic trash bag filled with clothes. The same neighbors who had watched her arrogant performance on my driveway 2 weeks prior now stood on their own manicured lawns, whispering and shaking their heads as the disgraced matriarch was forcefully removed from her property. The bank, which was legally my LLC, immediately secured the property, changing the locks and boarding up the vulnerable entryways. She stood on the sidewalk watching the heavy deadbolts click into place, physically locked out of the life she had sacrificed for a criminal son. With no savings, no retirement funds, and her credit completely destroyed by the foreclosure, my mother could not rent a respectable apartment. She was forced to seek emergency housing in a notoriously run-down section of the city. She moved into a tiny, cramped studio apartment above a noisy laundromat. The walls were thin, the plumbing leaked, and the neighborhood was a stark, terrifying contrast to the pristine suburban streets she was accustomed to. The wealthy matriarch, who had judged everyone by their financial status, was now living paycheck to paycheck on a meager Social Security allowance, trapped in a squalid box that smelled constantly of damp mildew and bleach. Her descent from absolute arrogance to complete poverty was agonizingly rapid. The crushing reality of her new life finally broke whatever remained of her pride. Alone in that dismal studio apartment with Brandon in jail, and the rest of the extended family actively pursuing legal action against them, my mother turned to the only person she thought she could still manipulate: me. The voicemails started arriving 3 weeks after her eviction. At first they were blocked by my carrier settings, but I could still see the transcribed messages filtering into my blocked messages folder. She called every single day, sometimes twice a day. The tone of her voice shifted wildly from call to call, reflecting the chaotic desperation of a woman who had completely lost control of her reality. Her first few messages were laced with lingering entitlement. She demanded that I call off the lawyers, claiming that she had suffered enough, and that it was time for me to act like a proper daughter and rescue her from the terrible apartment. When I did not respond, the entitlement morphed into aggressive guilt trips. She cried loudly into the receiver, weaponizing the memory of my childhood, claiming she had sacrificed her youth to raise me, and that I owed her a comfortable retirement. She tried to use Leo as leverage, sobbing that it was a tragedy a grandmother was being kept away from her only grandson. When the guilt trips failed to produce a response, her messages devolved into pure begging. The proud, malicious woman who had stood on my front porch and threatened to throw my baby onto the street was now sobbing hysterically into my voicemail inbox. She begged for forgiveness. She swore she had made a terrible mistake and that she had been blinded by Brandon's lies. She begged for a place to stay, promising she would sleep on my couch, cook my meals, and be a quiet, compliant guest if I would just let her inside my beautiful, secure home. She pleaded for a second chance, swearing she had changed, swearing she would be the mother I always wanted if I just opened the door. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping a fresh cup of coffee, and read the transcriptions of her desperate pleas. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel the crushing conditioned obligation that had dictated my entire life. I did not feel any lingering desire to save her. I simply felt nothing at all. The emotional cord had been permanently severed. She had not changed. She was simply out of options. If Brandon had succeeded in stealing my home, she would have happily watched me suffer on the streets. Her apologies were nothing but survival tactics, empty words spoken by a woman who only valued people based on what she could extract from them. I did not block the voicemails because keeping a digital record of her harassment was a necessary legal precaution, but I absolutely never responded. I never picked up the phone. I never sent a text message. I never acknowledged her existence in any capacity whatsoever. Every time a new, tearful, desperate voicemail appeared in my blocked folder, I simply swiped left. I deleted every single one of her pleas without listening to the audio. My silence was absolute, unyielding, and completely devastating. It was the ultimate assertion of my power. I had finally realized that the most profound punishment I could inflict upon a narcissist was to permanently remove their audience. With my mother completely removed from my digital and physical world, the final business of the Harrington family estate could be concluded in absolute silence. 6 months after the sheriff locked the doors on the property, the foreclosure auction officially finalized. Because I held the debt through Leo Investments, LLC, the process was clean, surgical, and highly lucrative. I sat in Harrison's corner office on a crisp autumn morning, a stark contrast to the stormy Tuesday when this war began. The massive mahogany desk was clear of any dramatic forged documents or desperate legal threats. Instead, a single pristine stack of closing papers rested in the center of the polished wood. Harrison handed me his heavy luxury pen, a small triumphant smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The sale of the property closed at 15%, above the initial asking price. He stated, his voice reflecting deep professional satisfaction. The suburban market is incredibly competitive right now, and the property was in prime condition. After recovering your initial capital investment for the debt acquisition, compensating the firm for our comprehensive legal fees, and settling the outstanding county taxes, the remaining liquid profit is extremely substantial. It is a total financial victory, Rachel. I signed my name on the final line of the settlement agreement, feeling the ink glide smoothly across the heavy legal paper. It was the last physical tie to my mother's disastrous choices, now legally severed and converted into raw capital. I pushed the document back across the desk, making sure my instructions were explicitly clear. I do not want a single penny of that profit sitting in my personal banking accounts, Harrison. I said, my tone leaving no room for debate. I want it transferred immediately into a new, irrevocable trust. Name it the David and Leo Foundation. I want the trust parameters structured so tightly that absolutely no one, not a future spouse, not a distant relative, and certainly not a desperate, estranged grandmother, can ever access the principal. It must be locked down exclusively for Leo's higher education, his future business ventures, or any catastrophic medical needs he might face. I want to build a wall of money around him that protects him from the kind of financial desperation that ruined my brother. Harrison nodded, taking the paperwork and placing it into a fresh, secure file folder. I have already drafted the trust parameters based on our previous strategic conversations. It is completely bulletproof, Rachel. The capital will be managed by a neutral third-party fiduciary board with strict oversight. It will grow exponentially over the next 18 years in diversified index funds. Your son will step into adulthood with a financial fortress built around him. Your mother tried to steal his sanctuary to save a federal criminal. Instead, she inadvertently funded your son's entire future. The irony is quite poetic. I leaned back in the comfortable leather chair, looking out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city skyline. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The crushing anxiety that had defined my early postpartum days was entirely gone. In its place was a profound, unshakable foundation of peace. I had played the ultimate game of defensive chess, and I had secured a victory that would echo through generations. One full year later, the harsh, terrifying memories of that stormy week felt like they belonged to a completely different lifetime. It was a spectacular, sun-drenched Saturday afternoon in late May. The historic colonial house, the very same property my mother and brother had so desperately tried to steal, was completely transformed. The heavy commercial-grade deadbolts I had installed during the siege were still securely in place, but they no longer felt like the heavy iron bars of a fortress protecting us from invaders. They simply felt like the standard boundaries of a deeply loved, fiercely protected sanctuary. I stood in the center of my bright, renovated kitchen, tying the strings of a clean linen apron around my waist. The long granite countertops were covered in trays of beautifully frosted cupcakes, massive fresh fruit platters, and a spectacular custom-designed birthday cake shaped like a friendly green dinosaur. Today was Leo's first birthday party. The house was filled with the vibrant, joyful sounds of preparation and light jazz playing over the sound system. There was no tension in the air. There was no underlying threat of criticism, no passive-aggressive remarks about my career choices, and absolutely no anxiety about a sudden violent intrusion by entitled family members. I walked through the French doors of my living room and stepped out onto the large wrap-around wooden porch. The expansive backyard was a masterpiece of vibrant spring colors. The heirloom roses David and I had painstakingly planted 2 years ago were in full, magnificent bloom, their rich crimson petals glowing brightly in the warm afternoon sun. Vanessa had once sneered that her children would play in this exact garden while I rotted away in a tiny, cramped apartment downtown. Instead, the perfectly manicured lawn was currently covered in colorful picnic blankets, a massive professional bubble machine, and a small, brightly colored inflatable wading pool filled with plastic balls. Camilla emerged from the back door carrying a towering stack of brightly colored paper plates and matching napkins. She looked radiant and relaxed, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, laughing brightly as she playfully bumped her hip against my shoulder. The birthday boy is currently receiving a massive amount of highly undivided attention from his favorite honorary uncle, she announced, pointing a finger toward the far corner of the yard near the old oak tree. I looked over and smiled broadly. Harrison, dressed completely out of character, in a casual linen button-down shirt and khaki shorts, was sitting cross-legged on a plaid picnic blanket. He was holding a brightly wrapped gift box, making exaggerated, dramatic faces, while a delighted, giggling Leo attempted to tear the shiny wrapping paper to absolute shreds. Harrison had transitioned seamlessly from my ruthless corporate bulldog attorney to a genuine, deeply valued friend. He had protected us when we were at our most vulnerable, utilizing his brilliant legal mind to save my home, and he had earned a permanent, respected place in our chosen family. The guests began to arrive shortly after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The wide driveway, which had once been aggressively blocked by a hostile moving truck and flashing police cruisers, was now filled with the cars of people who truly mattered to my daily life. My found family poured into the backyard, bringing a tidal wave of genuine love, enthusiastic congratulations, and unburdened celebration. There was Sarah, a fellow medical illustrator I had collaborated with for years, who brought her 2 young daughters to play excitedly in the continuous stream of bubbles. There was Marcus, my main publishing client, who had generously flown in from Chicago, specifically to celebrate the milestone and discuss my upcoming textbook contracts. Several close neighbors who had rallied around me during the initial neighborhood gossip phase arrived with delicious homemade side dishes, warm hugs, and genuine smiles. The yard was quickly filled with the sound of clinking glasses, bright, engaging conversation, and the chaotic, wonderful laughter of children running barefoot across the soft grass. I walked smoothly through the crowd, carrying a silver tray of iced drinks, feeling a deep, profound sense of overwhelming gratitude. There were absolutely no blood relatives present. There was no arrogant golden child brother demanding attention and special treatment. There was no narcissistic mother orchestrating unnecessary drama, judging the guests, or criticizing the quality of the catering. The complete absence of their toxic, heavy gravity made the entire atmosphere feel incredibly light and buoyant. I did not have to perform a delicate balancing act to keep the peace. I did not have to shrink my own personality to make someone else feel comfortable or superior. I was simply Rachel, a highly successful businesswoman, a devoted single mother, and a deeply loved friend. Camilla walked up to me, trading her empty plate for a glass of sparkling water. She looked around the bustling, happy yard, taking in the idyllic scene, and sighed contentedly. You built a truly beautiful life right here, Rachel. You really did it. You saved your home, and you made it perfect. We did it, I corrected, gently clinking my glass against hers in a silent toast of appreciation. I could not have survived that terrifying first month without you stepping in to protect us and coordinate the chaos. You were my frontline defense when I was too completely exhausted to stand on my own 2 feet. Camilla smiled warmly, wrapping her arm tightly around my waist. Family is who shows up when the door is locked and the drill is spinning. Every single person standing in this yard today showed up for you when it actually counted. I nodded slowly, my eyes scanning the lively crowd until they landed securely on my son. Leo was currently covered in bright blue frosting, sitting like a tiny king in a high chair that had been moved directly into the center of the lawn. He was aggressively smashing a vanilla cupcake with his tiny fists, a look of pure, unadulterated joy plastered across his messy face. He was healthy. He was completely safe. He was surrounded exclusively by adults who looked at him with nothing but unconditional affection and genuine delight. He will never know the feeling of conditional love, I said softly, my voice thick with raw emotion. He will never have to earn his place in this house by performing for a narcissist. He will never know what it feels like to be the designated scapegoat for someone else's massive personal failures. He gets to just be a child. I walked across the soft grass, the afternoon sun warming my shoulders, and knelt carefully beside Leo's high chair. I took a damp cloth from the table and gently wiped a large smear of blue frosting from the tip of his nose. He let out a loud, delighted squeal and grabbed my index finger tightly with his small, sticky hand. I looked deeply into his bright, innocent eyes, seeing the perfect, beautiful reflection of the profound love David and I had shared from the very beginning. The grueling journey from that terrifying Tuesday morning to this perfectly peaceful Saturday afternoon had demanded every single ounce of my mental strength, my strategic intelligence, and my maternal courage. My mother had foolishly assumed that my profound grief was a crippling weakness. She had incorrectly assumed that my gentle nature meant I lacked the capacity for absolute ruthlessness when pushed into a corner. She had fundamentally misunderstood the transformative, terrifying power of motherhood. She forced me to step directly into the fire, and I had emerged completely unscathed, holding the unassailable deed to my own salvation. I had successfully broken the generational cycle of psychological abuse and financial manipulation. I had severed the rotting toxic branches of my family tree and planted something entirely new in its place, an environment rooted in mutual respect, fierce loyalty, and genuine care. My mother and brother were currently living with the devastating, inescapable consequences of their own staggering greed, entirely banished from the beautiful, thriving reality I had meticulously created. The heavy trauma of the past was no longer a restrictive chain dragging me backward into a state of despair. It was simply the solid bedrock foundation upon which I had built an impenetrable, lasting fortress for my family. I stood up tall, lifting a giggling frosting-covered Leo securely into my arms, holding him tight against my chest. I looked around my vibrant, blooming garden, at the historic house standing proudly in the warm sunlight, and at the incredible found family laughing together on the perfectly manicured lawn. I had fiercely protected my peace against all odds. I had completely secured my child's future without compromising my integrity. I had built a secure, loving life entirely on my own terms, free from toxic expectations. The war was officially over, and the rest of our beautiful, unburdened lives was just beginning.